The floor moved under Sean Coleman's left boot just after he pulled the rotten threshold loose. It didn't crack or sag. The oak boards shifted sideways with a low wooden knock, as if something beneath the Ferry booth had released after years of holding tight. Sean grabbed the fixed bench with one hand. His pry bar dropped between his feet. "Don't move," Paige said. She was outside the doorway, kneeling beside a bucket of rusted screws. Beyond her, the Choptank River flashed in the morning sun. The neighboring marina was already awake. A halyard tapped against a mast, a fuel pump clicked, and somebody across the water started an outboard motor. "I'm not planning to," Sean said. The floor had opened a narrow black seam beside his boot. Cool air came through it, carrying the smell of old wood and river mud. Sean looked down, then at the threshold he'd just removed. He'd expected ants, rot, maybe another repair he couldn't afford. He hadn't expected the center of the booth to slide beneath him. Paige stood slowly. That section wasn't loose yesterday. It wasn't loose 5 minutes ago. She reached for the flashlight clipped to her belt, but Sean stopped her. "Wait." The panel gave another small knock beneath his weight. 3 weeks earlier, Sean hadn't known there was a panel. He hadn't even known if the booth would remain standing through the summer. All he knew was that his sister wanted it gone, his grandfather had refused to let it go, and $6 had somehow made the problem his. The family settlement meeting took place in the dining room of the house where Sean and Heather had spent most Sunday afternoons growing up. Paul Coleman's reading glasses still sat on the windowsill beside a folded newspaper. No one had moved them since his death, though 2 years had passed. Heather sat at the head of the table with a brown folder open in front of her. She had placed a legal pad beside it and written 3 neat headings: house, accounts, remaining property. Sean sat halfway down the table. Paige had been invited because one strip of the estate bordered her marina, though Heather had made it clear that Paige wasn't part of the settlement. The air conditioner hummed above them. A glass pitcher of water sweated onto a cork mat. Nobody drank from it. Heather turned the first page. "The house transfer is straightforward," she said. "The appraisal is complete, and I'm keeping it as agreed." Sean looked toward the kitchen doorway. He didn't remember agreeing. He remembered Heather telling him the house required someone who could manage it. She'd said Sean's work was too uncertain and his savings were too thin. She'd said selling his share back to the estate would protect him from taxes and repairs. That conversation had happened 6 days after the funeral, while he was still returning Paul's borrowed tools to the garage. Heather continued. "The liquid accounts cover the final expenses. After those clear, the balance stays with me against the house equalization." Paige glanced at Sean. He kept his eyes on the table. He had already signed away his claim to the house. He had understood the paper well enough. What he hadn't understood was how quickly a family home could turn into a list of costs after the person who held everyone together was gone. Heather slid one page toward him. "This is your payment confirmation." Sean read the amount. It was modest, but it was what they'd discussed. Enough to clear one credit card, replace the tires on his truck, and leave something in savings. His grown daughter had told him not to fight over money. "You'll spend more proving they cheated you than you'll ever recover," she'd said over the phone. Sean hadn't thought Heather was cheating him. He thought she was arranging the family in the order she'd always believed it belonged. Heather handled papers. Heather made decisions. Sean fixed whatever stopped working after everyone else went home. He folded the confirmation once. "What's under remaining property?" Paige asked. Heather didn't look at her. The landing. That brought Sean's head up. Paul's ferry booth stood at the end of Ferry Point Road, where a short pier reached into the river beside Paige's marina. Passenger service had ended years earlier. The booth hadn't sold tickets since then, but Paul had kept going down there with a toolbox and a thermos. He replaced loose boards, painted the window frames, and cleared reeds from the pilings after storms. Sean had asked him once why he bothered. "Water notices when you stop paying attention," Paul had said. It was the sort of answer Paul gave when he didn't want to explain himself. Heather took a photograph from the folder. It showed the booth leaning slightly behind waist-high weeds. One shutter hung crooked, gray paint peeled from the siding in strips. "The insurer won't cover it," she said. "The estate can't close cleanly while it remains an unmanaged liability." "It managed to stand there for nearly 50 years, Paige said. "It's not the standing that worries me. It's someone falling through it." Sean looked at the photograph. "What happens to it?" "Removal," Paige sat back. "You mean demolition?" "I mean removing an unsafe structure before storm season." "And the pier?" if necessary. Paige's face changed at that. Her marina shared the protected approach beside the old landing. Heavy demolition could block the narrow service lane. More than that, she had worked beside Paul on that pier for years. Heather knew it, and Paige knew Heather knew it. "You didn't call me about an inspection," Paige said. "I didn't need to. You need access through my gravel lot if you bring equipment down there. There's access from Ferry Point Road, not for the truck they'll use." Heather pressed her thumb against the edge of her legal pad. She disliked being corrected in front of Sean, especially by Paige. "This isn't a marina meeting," she said. "No, it's a family meeting where you've already decided everything." Sean put the photograph flat between them. "How bad is the booth?" Heather gave him a tired look. "Bad enough that nobody wants it." "That wasn't my question. The sill is rotten. Several pier boards need a replacement. The power was disconnected. There's storm damage underneath, and the lot produces no income." Paige reached for the photograph. Heather held it down. "I've been there," Paige said. "The roof is still tight. You haven't been inside since Paul died. Neither have you." Heather removed her hand from the photograph. For a moment, nobody spoke. A delivery van passed outside, making sunlight move across the dining room wall. Sean remembered Paul coming into this room one winter, with river water darkening both knees of his work pants. Heather had told him the landing was wasting his time. Paul had gone to the kitchen, washed his hands, and returned with a piece of pie. He hadn't argued. He'd simply gone back to the booth the next morning. "What's the land worth?" Sean asked. Heather opened another page. "The structure has no practical value. The separate estate parcel costs money to maintain and creates exposure. I asked for a nominal valuation so it can be conveyed or cleared." "How nominal?" She took 6 $1 bills from the folder and placed them on the table. The gesture had been prepared. That bothered Sean more than the amount. $6, Heather said. "That's what the file assigns to it." Paige gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You brought cash for the joke." "It isn't a joke. If Sean wants something tangible from the estate, he can purchase the landing interest for $6. Then the taxes, repairs, insurance, and removal become his responsibility." Sean looked at the bills. Heather expected him to refuse. She had already pictured herself carrying them back to the bank, or using them for coffee. The offer allowed her to say he'd been given a choice. Once he declined, demolition would feel less like her decision. Paige understood that too. "Don't answer yet," she said. Heather turned to her. "He's 41. I know how old my cousin is." "Then let him speak." Sean lifted the photograph. The booth looked worse close up. Weeds covered the steps. One corner of the pier had dropped. A faded sign above the window still showed the outline of the word tickets. "What comes with it?" he asked. "The booth and the parcel listed in the conveyance." "What parcel?" Heather turned the paper so he could see the top line. The description contained a number, a road address, and several words Sean didn't understand. The survey reference meant nothing to him. 14 Ferry Point Road, she said. "The old landing property. You know where it is. Does it include the pier? It conveys whatever interest the estate holds under that parcel number. I'm not paying for another survey to describe a $6 shed." Paige leaned toward the page, but Heather covered the lower half with the folder. "Can he take this to someone?" Paige asked. "He can read it here." Sean heard the warning beneath Paige's question. He also felt Heather waiting for him to become embarrassed. He'd spent most of his adult life repairing boat engines, dock carts, pumps, household wiring, and every cheap used truck he'd ever owned. Legal descriptions were outside his reach, and Heather was counting on that. "What's the deadline?" he asked. "If you take it, today. I want the conveyance recorded with the other estate papers. If you don't take it, removal estimates go out Monday. That's not much time. It's been sitting there since passenger service ended. That wasn't my decision." "No, Sean, none of this was your decision. I'm trying to finish what Granddad left us." The words landed harder because her voice remained calm. Sean looked at Paul's glasses on the windowsill. One temple was wrapped in black electrical tape. Sean had fixed them at the kitchen counter, promising to order the proper part. Paul had worn the taped glasses for another year. Paige nudged the photograph with one finger. "The roadside is rough," she said. "The riverside might be better. I can help you inspect it." Heather closed the folder halfway. "Help him inspect it after he owns it. I can't keep opening estate property whenever somebody feels nostalgic." Sean placed his payment confirmation beside the proposed conveyance. On paper, the choice looked foolish. He had rent, fuel, and an old service truck that needed a transmission cooler. His daughter was grown and doing well, but being a father didn't end when the bills stopped arriving. He wanted a little reserve in case she needed him. The booth could swallow all of it. Still, Heather's words stayed with him. Tangible. He'd spent 2 years watching Paul's life become receipts, appraisals, donation boxes, and lists in Heather's handwriting. The landing was the one thing nobody wanted because it still required somebody to show up. "Let me see the whole page," he said. Heather hesitated, then moved the folder. Near the bottom, the parcel was identified by a short printed code. Sean read it twice, though it still told him nothing. There was a line for the buyer, and another acknowledging the price. Paige whispered, "You don't have to prove anything." "I know. Do you?" Sean looked at her. She wasn't challenging him. She was worried he might confuse being unwanted with being called. He took his wallet from his back pocket. Heather watched him remove a $5 bill and a single. Her expression lost its certainty. "You're serious," she said. "You made the offer. I also told you what it needs. You told me what you want done with it." He placed the money on her legal pad. Heather stared at the $6, then pushed the conveyance toward him. "Once you sign, the estate won't pay for any damage, injury, cleanup, taxes, or storm loss. I heard you, and I need it secured before the first named storm comes this way." Paige said, "We don't even have one forecast. Storm season doesn't wait for your schedule." Sean signed his name. Heather gathered the bills without counting them. "I'll have the recording receipt sent to you. Send the full recorded copy." She met his eyes. Of course. He wasn't sure she would have done that if he hadn't asked. An hour later, Sean followed Paige's pickup down Ferry Point Road. The street narrowed near the water, passing low houses, clipped hedges, and mailboxes faded by salt. At the end, Paige turned through the marina gate and parked beside a row of empty boat stands. The old ferry booth waited beyond the fuel shed. It was smaller than Sean remembered. The roof sloped toward the river. Boards covered the ticket window, and marsh grass crowded the landward wall. The pier beside it dipped in the middle, but remained above water. Paige handed him a key. "Paul gave me this when we were still maintaining the dock together," she said. "Heather never asked for it." Sean fitted the key into the swollen door. It turned, but the door wouldn't open. He put his shoulder against it. The wood groaned. Dust fell from the frame, and something scraped along the floor inside. "Easy," Paige said. "You break it, you fix it." Apparently that's true of everything here. He pushed again. The door opened 6 inches, then a foot. Cool, stale air reached them. Sunlight slipped across a narrow counter, a fixed oak bench, and a floor buried under leaves and windblown grit. On the wall hung an old brass bell with its pull cord still attached. Sean stepped inside and lifted the cord. The bell rang once, clear enough to carry across the marina. Paige smiled despite herself. Sean opened the river shutter, and daylight filled the booth. The room was barely wider than Sean could stretch his arms. A counter ran beneath the ticket window. The fixed bench filled the opposite wall. Old ferry notices curled behind cloudy plastic, and a calendar from the final year of service still hung beside the door. Paige pulled one of the notices free. "Summer crossings," she said. Paul used to complain when people arrived 30 seconds before departure. He complained, but he held the ferry. Only if he liked you. He liked everybody who was late. The boards under Sean's boots felt firm near the doorway. Farther in, the floor rose slightly toward the bench. It wasn't enough to see unless he lowered his head and looked across it. He pressed his heel against one board. No bounce. "Roof stayed dry, too," Paige said. "That stain is old." Sean looked up. A brown mark spread across one ceiling corner, but the wood around it felt hard. Paul had patched the roof with a square of newer metal, painted the same faded green as everything else. Near the counter, Sean found a narrow drawer swollen shut. He worked it gently until it opened. Inside were a pencil worn flat on one side, 3 ticket punches, a handful of corroded washers, and a small tin of peppermint candies gone white with age. Paige picked up one of the punches. "He kept these?" "He kept bent nails. He straightened bent nails. That was the part that worried me." She put the punch back. The rear wall had a low cupboard built beneath the counter. Its doors opened onto cleaning rags, an empty kerosene can, and a coiled length of electrical wire. Sean pulled the wire out and checked both ends. "This is good. You own $6 worth of wire already. $4 maybe. Let's not get carried away." She laughed, and the sound changed the room. For the first time, the booth felt less like something they were trespassing inside. Outside, a customer called Paige's name from the fuel dock. "I need to go," she said. "I've got 2 launches coming in before lunch." Sean nodded. "I'll clear enough to see what's wrong. Don't pull anything structural. I know. I mean it. You know I know." Paige studied him for a moment. She had seen Sean say yes to a small job, then stay until dark because every repair revealed another one. Paul had done the same thing. In Paige's mind, this wasn't always a virtue. "There's a pair of gloves in my truck," she said. "Use them. Rusty metal out here gets ugly." "I brought gloves." "Where?" Sean looked toward his truck. "Use mine," she said. She left through the doorway and walked back toward the marina. Within seconds, she was answering a question about fuel mix. Her voice became brisk and businesslike. She had customers waiting, bills due, and slips that needed to stay occupied. Helping Sean mattered to her, but it wasn't the only thing in her life. Sean understood that. He also felt the old pull to make sure he wouldn't become another problem Paige had to manage. He brought in a contractor bag and started with the leaves. Under them, the floor showed 2 kinds of wood. Pine boards covered the doorway area. Dark oak began several feet inside and continued beneath the fixed bench. The change looked deliberate, though there was nothing unusual about replacing damaged flooring in sections. He swept slowly. Bottle caps, dead beetles, and flakes of green paint collected ahead of the broom. Near the far wall, he uncovered a small round drain with a slotted brass cover. He poured half a bottle of water into it. The water disappeared at once. "That's one thing working," he said. No one heard him. The silence bothered him more than he expected. Paul's house had never been quiet when Sean worked there. A radio played in the garage. Heather came through with questions. Somebody needed a drawer adjusted or a loose handle tightened. Even when Paul sat nearby without speaking, Sean could feel him paying attention. At the booth, every sound returned to Sean alone. He opened both shutters. The river breeze pushed through, lifting dust from the counter. A white workboat moved along the channel, leaving a low wake that reached the pilings a minute later. The booth trembled lightly, but it didn't shift. He spent the next hour carrying out ruined paper and broken plastic bins. Anything that might matter went onto the bench. Anything clearly useless went into the bag. He found no records, no money, and no explanation for why Paul had kept maintaining the place. What he found was ordinary care. Each shutter hinge had been greased. The window latch had a newer screw where the original one stripped out. Someone had fitted a rubber strip along the river-facing sill to keep blown rain from entering. The work wasn't recent, but it had been done after passenger service stopped. Sean ran his thumb along the rubber. The booth hadn't been abandoned all at once. It had been cared for until Paul no longer came back. His phone rang in his pocket. Heather's name showed on the screen. Sean nearly let it go to voicemail. Then he wiped his hand on his jeans and answered. "What's wrong?" Heather paused. "Hello to you too." "Hello? What's wrong? I need you at the house. I'm at the landing." "I assume that. There are 2 metal shelving units in the garage that need to come apart before the donation pickup." "When's the pickup?" "Tomorrow morning." Sean looked around the booth. "You could have told me yesterday. I thought the driver would take them assembled." "He won't." "Then reschedule." "I already waited 3 weeks for this appointment, so call someone who does hauling. I'm not paying a hauler to remove shelves you can take apart in 20 minutes. The estimate was meant as praise. Heather often praised him by describing his work as easy. Sean leaned against the counter. "I have something open here." "What?" "A building. You can close the door." He looked toward the marina. Paige was tying a launch against the fuel dock, while its owner stood with his hands in his pockets. Heather lowered her voice. "Sean, I'm trying to finish this. Every time one thing leaves, I find another thing Granddad stored. You know the garage hardware better than I do." That part was true. Sean had assembled both shelving units with Paul. He knew one back leg was shimmed because the garage floor sloped. "I'll come by at 4, he said. "The donation office closes at 4, then 3. 2 would be better." Sean shut his eyes. "I'll be there at 2. "Thank you. Bring your socket set." She ended the call before he could answer. He stood with the phone in his hand. The booth needed hours of inspection. The pier needed more. Yet the moment Heather said she needed him, his own work became movable. He told himself it was because the house still contained Paul's things. If he didn't go, someone might throw away hardware, tools, or parts Paul had saved. That had happened before. Heather called it clearing space. Sean called it looking first. But he knew there was another reason. At the house, he was still useful. Useful had been the nearest thing he knew to secure. Sean closed the shutters and locked the booth. The key stuck halfway out, so he pulled the door toward him until the bolt settled. That small movement told him the frame had dropped on the hinge side. He made a note on the back of an old fuel receipt. Adjust door, check roof patch. Inspect floor change, trace drain. Then he drove to a hardware store and bought a proper notebook because writing the future of the landing on a receipt felt too much like something Heather would expect from him. He reached the family house 6 minutes before 2. Heather had opened both garage doors. Boxes lined the driveway. Each one had a printed label in thick black letters. Donate, recycle, house, Sean. His box was the smallest. You made one for me, he said. Heather came out carrying a stack of old gardening trays. I found some things that looked like yours. Inside his box were 2 cracked extension cords, a chipped coffee mug, and an owner's manual for a lawnmower he'd sold years ago. The mug was Granddad's, Sean said. I know, you used it. So did he. You can leave it if you don't want it. Sean placed the mug on the hood of his truck. The shelving unit stood against the rear wall. Heather had already emptied them. She pointed to the bolts. The driver said they need to be flat. I heard you. His socket set was behind the truck seat. As he carried it in, he noticed the pegboard above Paul's workbench was nearly empty. Where are his tools? Heather glanced over. Which tools? The planes, his hand saws, the brace set. I sold the planes. Sean set the socket case on the floor. You sold them? They were in the estate sale. You told me that sale was furniture and kitchen items. It included garage items. I asked you to call before you sold tools. You asked me to call if I found anything valuable. They were valuable to me. Then you should have taken them when we first cleared the bench. Sean stared at the pale outlines where the tools had hung. Dust had formed around each one over decades. A long, clean shape showed where the brace set used to be. He had seen those empty outlines on an earlier visit. He'd assumed Heather moved the tools into a cabinet. He hadn't asked. That was the part he couldn't place on her. Who bought them? He said. I don't remember. You have a sale list. The company handled individual purchases. Which company? Heather picked up another tray. I can give you the contact information after we finish. Sean wanted to put his socket set back in the truck and leave. Heather knew it. For one uneasy second, she wondered if she had pressed too hard. Then Sean opened the case. Which shelves first? Relief crossed her face before she hit it. The one by the freezer. He worked without speaking. The first unit came apart in 18 minutes. The bolts were rusted on the second, so he sprayed them and waited. Heather carried boxes past him, stopping once to ask whether an old battery charger was safe. It needs a new cord, he said. Can you do that? Yes. For me? He looked up from the shelving. Heather held the charger by its handle. She seemed honestly puzzled by his silence. Put it in the house box, he said. She did. That had always been their pattern. Heather decided where things belonged. Sean made those decisions function. When he was younger, he'd mistaken that arrangement for trust. Later, he called it keeping peace. Only now, kneeling on the garage floor while his own property waited by the river, did he see how often he had helped place himself last. The second shelf took nearly an hour. When it was flat, Heather checked the time. Good. They'll make it. Sean wiped his hands on a rag. The sale company. She went inside and returned with a business card. I don't think they keep buyer names for small items, she said. I'll ask. You're not going to make trouble, are you? I'm looking for tools. They were sold properly. I didn't say they weren't. Heather crossed her arms. You make that sound worse. Sean put the card in his wallet. Did Granddad keep anything from the landing here? No. The answer came too quickly. He had keys, Sean said. Receipts, paint, dock hardware. I cleared a box of corroded marine parts months ago. Where did it go? Trash, probably. I don't remember every washer. He thought of the greased hinges and the replaced window screw. Did you ever ask why he kept working down there? Heather looked toward the house. Because he couldn't let things go. That answer suited her. Sean had accepted it too, until he stood inside the booth and saw that Paul's repairs had been specific. He hadn't been wandering down there to remember the ferry. He'd been keeping water out and parts moving. Sean picked up Paul's chipped mug. I'm taking this. It's in your box. I'm also taking the battery charger. Heather frowned. You said you'd fix it for me. I will. I need one at the landing. You can use it there. That isn't convenient. Neither is driving across town to take apart shelves. She looked at him, surprised less by the refusal than by its size. Sean had denied her a battery charger, not the house. Still, something had moved between them. He carried it to his truck. Before leaving, he went back into the garage and opened the bottom drawer of Paul's workbench. Heather called from the driveway that she had already checked it. Beneath a stack of sandpaper lay an old brass padlock and 2 keys on a faded cork float. Landing was written across the float in Paul's block letters. Sean held them up. I thought you said there weren't any keys. I didn't know those were there. This time, he believed her. At the landing, 1 key opened the chain around the shore gate. The second opened a weathered utility cabinet behind the booth. Inside, he found the main water valve, a dry electrical conduit, and a row of labeled shutoffs for the pier. Paul hadn't left a mystery there. He had left access. Sean set the battery charger on the counter, placed the mug beside it, and opened his new notebook. On the first page, he wrote down everything the landing still had that worked. The drain, shutters, brass bell, gate lock, and main water valve went on the left side of the page. The drop door frame, dead power line, broken window latch, and soft threshold went on the right. Sean drew a line beneath both lists. At the bottom, he wrote, possible repair counter. He had carried tools from job to job for years. Most of his work came through phone calls from people who had heard he could fix an old pump without replacing the whole thing. He worked from his truck, borrowed garages, and the back corners of boatyards. The booth offered little space, but it had a counter, a roof, and a road address. He took a photograph with the shutters open and sent it to his daughter. She replied with a picture of a tiny house and a wrench. Sean wasn't sure whether she was teasing him or approving. With her, it was often both. The next morning, he returned with cleaning supplies and a folding table. Paige came over carrying 2 cups of coffee. You slept on this? She asked. For a few hours. That's never a good sign. He handed her the notebook. She read the first page, then turned to the second. Repair counter? Small work. Electrical parts, pumps, starters, controls. Things people can carry in. You're planning to work here? I'm planning to see if I can. Paige gave him one of the cups. There's no power. There's a conduit. A dry conduit isn't electricity. It means somebody intended electricity to come back through it, or somebody disconnected it without ripping out the pipe. That's still considerate. She looked through the ticket window at the marina. 2 covered boats sat on stands near her service shed. A third occupied the work slip. She had more repair requests than space, especially when customers brought small problems that tied up a bench for half a day. What would you charge me for bench space? Sean asked. In that booth? In your shed, until this is ready. I don't need another person leaving parts on my benches. I wouldn't leave parts. You left half a carburetor in my office last spring. It was there for 1 night. It was there for 4 days. I was waiting for a gasket. You said 1 night every day. Sean drank his coffee. Paige looked at the booth again. If you make this usable, I could send small repairs over. Not my staff work. Overflow. That's what I'm asking. No, you asked what I'd charge. What would you charge? Help me replace the rollers on the launch trailer. That's too much. Then stop offering family rates. Sean smiled. 2 rollers, all 4, 3, and you buy the hardware. Paige held out her hand. He shook it. The agreement was small, but it was the first thing attached to the landing that hadn't come from Heather. Paige needed something from him, and Sean needed something from her. Neither of them pretended otherwise. Before she returned to the marina, she pointed at the pier. No customers passed the shore gate. I wasn't going to send anyone onto it. You were thinking about it? I was thinking about everything. That's why I said it. Sean spent the morning washing the counter and pulling loose trim from around the broken latch. He didn't touch the threshold. The wood there was wet enough to take the tip of his screwdriver, and he wanted to know what supported it before he started cutting. Near midday, Paige arrived carrying a white plastic bilge pump with 2 short wires hanging from it. First customer, she said. You said the counter wasn't ready. You said you wanted to see if you could work here. Whose is it? Mine. The pump quit in the service skiff. That isn't a customer. I pay my bills. She put it on the clean section of counter. Sean fetched a small battery from his truck and connected the leads. The motor clicked but didn't turn. He removed the base, cleared a twist of fishing line from the impeller, and tried again. The pump whined to life, spraying a mouthful of old water across Paige's shirt. She stepped back. Excellent service. You brought it full. You turned it toward me. I turned it away from the wall. Paige wiped her shirt with a rag while Sean checked the current draw. The motor was working too hard. He opened the housing again and found grit packed around the shaft seal. That line didn't stop it, he said. It's been pulling sand. The skiff sits shallow by the fuel dock. Raise the pickup an inch. Can you make a bracket? Now you're a customer. I was always a customer. He cut a strip from a piece of aluminum angle in his truck, drilled 2 holes, and bent it in Paige's vise. The work took less than an hour. When he finished, the pump ran smoothly without heating the wires. Paige placed folded cash on the counter. Sean pushed it back. Trailer rollers. That's for the bracket. The rollers pay for bench space. You own the pump, and you own the counter. She left the money there. Sean looked around the booth after she went. The repair hadn't transformed anything. Dust still clung to the upper walls. The floor was stained, and the doorway remained soft under the temporary board he'd laid over it. But a broken thing had come through the window and left working. He entered the payment in his notebook. A shadow crossed the doorway. An older man stood outside, wearing a canvas cap and a pale blue work shirt. He held the gate chain in one hand, but hadn't opened it. You charging admission again? He asked. Sean recognized Thomas Ross from Paul's funeral. Before that, he remembered him behind the wheel of the old passenger ferry, one hand resting on the throttle, while he talked to people through the open side window. Depends where you're going, Sean said. Thomas lifted the chain. This key yours now? Yes. Then I'll wait until you say come in. The courtesy caught Sean off guard. Heather had treated the landing as a burden before it belonged to him, and as a deadline afterward. Thomas was the first person to ask where Sean's boundaries started. Come in, Sean said. Thomas hooked the chain aside and walked toward the booth. He stopped at the foot of the pier, pressed one boot against a board, then continued along the landward edge. Don't go past the gate, Sean said. Thomas looked back. Good. I mean it. So do I. He entered the booth and rested his palm on the counter. His eyes moved over the open shutters, the clean drain, and the items Sean had arranged on the bench. Paige said you bought it for $6. That sounds like Heather. Sean waited. Thomas touched the brass bell, but didn't ring it. She always did like a number that made her point. You think it's worth more? Everything's worth more than $6 to somebody. That isn't an answer. It's the answer I have. Thomas moved to the rear corner and looked up at the patch ceiling. Paul did that after a branch tore the roof. After ferry service ended? About a year after. Sean set down his pencil. Why? Because rain was getting in. That's what Heather would call one of his habits. What habit? Fixing things that didn't need to stay. Thomas turned toward him. Your grandfather didn't come down here to keep busy. His knees hurt too much for that. He never told me what he wanted with it. He didn't tell me either. You worked here. I ran the boat. Paul kept the landing. Paige said you maintained it together. Later on, yes. She handled more than most people knew. Thomas tapped the counter twice with his fingers. Paul kept the approach clear. He kept the shutters moving. He checked the pilings after every hard blow. For a ferry that stopped running, for a landing that was still here. Sean looked through the window toward the empty river approach. Did he expect service to return? He expected people to knead away across the water. That's not always the same thing. What does that mean? It means Paul didn't tell me his whole business. The answer frustrated Sean, but Thomas wasn't withholding anything. He was careful about the difference between what he had seen and what he assumed. Sean respected that. Thomas stepped toward the doorway and pressed the temporary board with his toe. This threshold's finished, I know. Floor behind it isn't. You're sure? I helped Paul carry those oak boards in after the surge. Sean looked at the dark section of floor. You helped build it? No. I carried. Paul laid it with another fellow. When? Long before a passenger service ended. Water came through here high enough to float the ticket stool. Why oak? It was what Paul wanted. Did the whole floor need replacement? Thomas lowered himself carefully onto the fixed bench. That's what I thought. Then he replaced the river section and left the pine near the door. Said the oak needed to sit higher. It does sit higher. Half an inch, maybe. Sean crouched and looked across the boards again. Was there damage underneath? There was damage everywhere. Pier twisted, shingles gone, mud in the booth. We had work enough without asking why one board was thicker than another. Thomas rubbed one knee. He took his time with this part. Tighter work than a ferry booth needed. Sean reached toward a seam, then stopped. He'd promised Paige he wouldn't pull anything structural. He also didn't know whether the raised floor was tied into the wall or simply sitting over repaired joists. Did Paul ever have it inspected? He asked. Not while I was here. Who would know these pilings? Paige knows the history. You need somebody licensed and insured before you put people on them. Thomas stood. That costs money, Sean said. So does finding out after somebody falls. He left through the doorway, then turned near the gate. Paul checked this place the Thursday before he went into the hospital. Sean stared at him. He came down here that week. Couldn't drive. I brought him. What did he do? Walked the booth, tested the shutters, stood at the window a while. Did he say anything? He said, "Not yet." Not yet what? He didn't say. Thomas closed the chain behind him and walked toward the marina office. Sean remained by the counter. Paul had been weak during that final week. He had refused visitors twice and slept through most afternoons. Yet, he'd asked Thomas to bring him to the landing. That didn't prove the booth held anything. It did prove Heather's explanation was incomplete. Paul hadn't kept coming because he'd forgotten passenger service was over. He had made one last inspection when walking itself had become difficult. Sean opened his notebook and crossed out the word possible before repair counter. Then he called a marine construction company in town and asked for a pier inspection. The inspector came the following afternoon in rubber boots, carrying a probe, a mallet, and a moisture meter. He spent nearly 2 hours beneath the pier and around the shore supports. Sean and Paige followed along the gravel edge while Thomas watched from a bench near the marina office. The outer pilings were better than they looked. The middle supports needed bolts and cross-bracing. The serious problem lay near shore, where 2 connections had pulled loose and one cap had begun to split. "Can it be saved?" Sean asked. "Yes," the inspector said, "but don't open it to foot traffic until it's stabilized." "What would that take?" The inspector wrote on a printed estimate sheet against the hood of his truck. Materials, labor, equipment access, and disposal filled separate lines. He handed the page to Sean. The total was $9,400. Sean read it once. That amount would take most of the savings he had left after the settlement. "How long is the estimate good?" he asked. 10 days. I have an opening next week. After that, I'm booked into storm season." Paige read over Sean's shoulder. "The booth isn't the main liability," she said quietly. "No." The pier was repairable. That was the good news Sean had paid to learn. It was also the first proof that keeping the landing meant more than cleaning a room and hanging out a sign. He folded the estimate and put it inside his notebook. Then he walked to the shore gate and locked it himself. For the rest of that afternoon, Sean found reasons not to decide. He measured the shore gate. He cleaned the utility cabinet. He drove to the hardware store for replacement screws he didn't need yet. At home, he opened his banking app 3 times and moved no money. $9,400 was not everything he had. It was close enough to feel like it. He had spent years building that reserve in small pieces. A weekend engine job put something in. New tires took something out. A good month added more. A slow winter erased it. He didn't think of the money as savings for a particular future. It was what stood between him and asking Heather for help. By evening, that fact had become part of the decision. He called Paige. "I'm taking the opening," he said. She didn't answer immediately. He could hear a metal door rolling down at the marina. "All of it?" she asked. "All of what?" "The estimate? They won't stabilize half a pier. You know what I mean." "Yes." "I can contribute labor, Sean. Clearing access, moving material, whatever they allow. I can't contribute that kind of cash. I didn't ask you to. I need you to hear me say it." He sat on the edge of his bed. "I hear you. If the landing brings traffic, my marina benefits. I'm not helping because I feel sorry for you. I didn't think you were. You looked like you did when I brought the pump. That was because you sprayed yourself. You sprayed me. The pump did." Paige let the argument go. "Call them before somebody else takes the opening," she said. Sean called the inspector the next morning. He paid the required portion, signed the work authorization, and committed the full $9,400. After the confirmation arrived, he stared at the email until the letters blurred. Then he printed it and placed it in the booth notebook. The Marine crew arrived the following Monday with a flatbed, a compressor, stacks of treated lumber, and enough equipment to block the end of Ferry Point Road. Paige moved 2 boat trailers before sunrise so they could reach the shore side without crossing her fuel lines. Sean brought coffee. Thomas brought a folding chair. "You supervising?" Sean asked him. "I'm retired. I observe mistakes now." The crew leader removed the shore gate and marked the weak section with orange paint. Once the first outer board came up, the damage was easier to see. A steel connection had pulled away from the cap. One timber had split around an old bolt and opened wider each time the pier lifted on a wake. Sean crouched near the exposed section. "That split looks recent." "It's been moving a while," the crew leader said. "Fresh surface just means the last movement opened it." Thomas leaned forward from his chair. "Paul put that cap in after the big surge." "You sure?" Sean asked. I held the other end. The crew leader tapped the wood. "Good timber. Wrong hardware for the movement it's had." Thomas nodded. It was what we could get that week. That was the first time Sean heard anyone describe Paul's work without making it sound like a private obsession. The repair had been practical. It had held for years. It had simply reached the end of what it could do. The crew installed new connections and sistered the split cap. Paige helped unload cross-bracing until the crew leader told her his insurance wouldn't allow her beneath the work area. She argued once, then carried scrap away instead. Near noon, Heather's car stopped behind the flatbed. She got out wearing office clothes and shoes that sank slightly into the gravel. Her eyes moved from the compressor to the open pier. "What is this?" she asked. Sean set down the board he was carrying. "Stabilization." "I can see that." "Who approved it?" "I did." Heather looked toward the crew. "On estate property?" "On mine." The crew leader glanced at Sean, then returned to tightening a connection. He had no interest in joining a family discussion. Heather lowered her voice. "The recording doesn't make an unsafe structure safe. That's why they're here. You didn't even wait for a full property assessment. I had the pier inspected. You paid for that?" "Yes." "With what?" Sean wiped sawdust from his hands. "My money." Heather looked at Paige. "Did you encourage this?" Paige was holding one end of a removed brace. "He doesn't need permission from either of us." "I'm asking because my marina is now blocked." "Your marina?" Paige's face hardened. Heather heard herself too late. She tried to correct it. "The estate's access to the marina boundary. There is no estate access through my working yard," Paige said. "I moved my equipment for Sean's insured crew." Heather turned back to Sean. "I called you yesterday. I was working. I left a message. I heard it. And I'm not removing the booth before it's inspected. The pier is part of the danger. The pier is being repaired, which means you're encouraging people to use it. The gate stays closed until the contractor clears it." Heather pressed her lips together. She'd expected Sean to lose interest after seeing the expense. Instead, equipment stood in front of her, material was being cut, and people were treating him as the owner. Her concern about liability was real, so was her dislike of having misjudged him. "The estate closing is still exposed," she said. "How?" "Because the transfer came through the estate. You recorded it. That doesn't erase every question." "What question?" "If someone claims an injury tied to conditions that existed before transfer, I have to respond. The contractor is insured. I'm arranging coverage before public access." "You're arranging coverage?" "I made calls." Heather looked at him as if he'd started speaking a language she didn't expect him to know. "Storm season is already here," she said. "If a named storm forms, you need a removal plan." No, I need a storm plan. That isn't the same thing. You don't know what the booth needs. I'm finding out." Heather gestured toward the river. "And if finding out costs more than you have, then I decide what happens next." The sentence was quiet. It still stopped her. Sean had spent so long asking Heather what the family needed that saying what he would decide felt almost rude. He had to resist the urge to soften it. "You can't come through the work area without calling me," he added. "I'm the executor. Not for this parcel anymore." Paige lowered her eyes to hide a brief smile. Thomas didn't bother. Heather looked from one face to another. She had arrived expecting support for the sensible position. Instead, she was standing outside a locked work area on property she had sold. "I'll need copies of the insurance documents," she said. "If there's a reason you're entitled to them, send it to me in writing." She stared at him. "That sounds like Paige. It sounds like me." Heather returned to her car. Before getting in, she looked at the booth for several seconds. Sean couldn't tell whether she was worried it would fail or worried it wouldn't. The stabilization took 4 days. New bracing crossed beneath the middle span. The shore connections were replaced, and the split cap was reinforced. The crew reset the uneven boards, leaving enough of their weathered surface that the pier didn't look newly built. It simply stopped dipping beneath each step. On the final afternoon, the inspector walked the full length with Sean. They stopped at each repair while he explained what had changed. "You can open it to normal foot traffic," he said. "Keep heavy equipment off. Check after major storms, and don't let debris build around the braces." Sean signed the completion sheet. After the truck left, Paige walked from shore to the end and back. She carried a cup of coffee without spilling it. "That might be the most expensive level cup in Oxford," she said. "You can pay a toll next time." Thomas rang the booth bell once. The sound carried over the pier and out across the water. 2 people at the marina looked up. Sean unlocked the gate and stood aside. No crowd waited. No ferry approached. Still, the path from Ferry Point Road to the river was safe again. That evening, he bolted the gate back in place so it could remain closed while he worked inside. The repaired pier had made retreat harder. He couldn't tell himself he'd only bought a foolish little booth now. He had spent nearly all his reserve making the landing usable. 3 weeks after he first opened the door, he began the first repair inside. Paige arrived after finishing a fuel delivery. She set a bucket beside the steps and sorted the old screws Sean had removed from the door frame. He worked his pry bar under the rotten threshold, easing it upwards so he could preserve the ends of the pine floorboards. The wood came loose with a damp tearing sound. Sean lifted it free. Beneath it, the sill showed surface rot, but remained solid farther back. "That's better than it looked," Paige said. "Don't say that yet." He shifted his left foot onto the oak section and reached down with the pry bar. The boards moved beneath him. He caught the bench. The pry bar dropped. A narrow seam opened beside his boot, and cool air rose from below. Paige reached for her flashlight. "Wait," Sean said. The panel knocked again. He moved his weight slowly toward the pine floor. Paige took his arm from the doorway until both boots were clear of the oak section. "Was that the joist?" she asked. "No. Joists don't move sideways." Sean knelt near the seam without touching it. Dust had fallen into the opening, revealing a clean edge beneath the dark floor surface. Paige shone the light across it. The oak section hadn't pulled away from broken wood. It had slid along a fitted channel. "That's joinery," she said. "Looks like it. Why would anybody make a floor panel slide?" Sean placed the pry bar flat against the panel and pushed gently. It moved another fraction of an inch, then stopped beneath the fixed bench. The opening widened enough to show the top of a joist cavity. A small rectangle of dull metal was screwed to the inner face. Paige angled the flashlight. "Can you read that?" Sean wiped the metal with one finger. Tarnish came away, showing brass beneath it. Stamped into the tag were 2 words and a number. "Parcel 014, B." Sean sat back on his heels. "That's on the conveyance," Paige said. "It's the number from Heather's paper, the one she wouldn't let me read. She let me read it after I asked." Sean took out his phone and photographed the tag without moving the panel farther. The seam continued under the bench, tight and straight. Paige pressed the bench with both hands. "This is fixed through the wall. Then we don't pull it. What do? We find out how the panel was meant to open." He studied the oak surface. What Thomas had called careful work now had a purpose, though Sean still didn't know what that purpose was. The tag didn't tell him what the parcel included. It didn't tell him why Paul had placed its number below the floor. It told him the raised section was an ordinary storm repair. Sean closed the shutters and locked the booth. Then he called Thomas and asked him to come back to the landing in the morning. Thomas arrived before the marina opened, carrying a wooden toolbox with a leather handle. Paige brought a drill from her service shed. Sean unlocked the booth and showed them the brass tag without moving the oak panel. Thomas lowered himself beside the seam. He put on his glasses, read the stamp, then sat back. "Did Paul ever mention that parcel number?" Sean asked. "Not to me." "Did you see him build this section?" "I saw the boards before he laid them. After that, I was busy getting the pier straight." Thomas ran 2 fingers along the exposed edge. "This isn't how I remember it opening." "You remember it opening?" "No. I remember the booth without the bench." Paige looked at the fixed oak seat. "The bench came later?" "Same repair. Paul built it after the floor went down." Sean pressed one end of the seat. It didn't move. "Why fix it to the wall?" "He said passengers needed somewhere dry to sit." There were already chairs. They floated out during the surge. Thomas leaned closer to the floor. Paul cut this tight, tighter than anything outside. Sean took a thin putty knife from his pocket and slid it into the seam. It went down nearly 2 inches before meeting wood. "There's space beneath it," he said. "Just space," Paige said. "Maybe." Thomas opened his toolbox and removed a short brass-headed hammer. The handle was dark from years of use. "Tap the boards," he said. "Don't strike them hard." Sean worked from the doorway toward the bench. The pine answered with a flat, solid sound. The first oak board sounded much the same. Near the center, the knock deepened. Paige marked the change with a piece of chalk. The hollow section continued toward the river wall and disappeared beneath the bench. It wasn't large enough to cover the whole floor. It followed the same line as the sliding panel. Thomas listened without offering an explanation. "You knew that was hollow," Sean said. "I knew it sounded different." "Before today?" Thomas nodded. "I heard it after Paul finished." "And you didn't ask?" "I did. He told me raised floors have air beneath them." "That answer satisfied you?" "No. But the ferry was due, and Paul had a way of becoming busy when he didn't want another question." Paige sat on the counter edge. "That sounds familiar." Sean ignored her. "Did Granddad ever open it in front of you?" "Not that I saw." "Did he store tools under there?" "Not that I saw." Thomas handed Sean the hammer. "I can tell you what happened. I can't tell you what he meant." That distinction left the mystery intact, but it gave Sean something useful. Paul had heard the hollow sound. He had been asked about it. He had chosen not to explain. Sean examined the bench. Its back rail was fastened to studs with 4 painted screws. The front legs appeared to pass through the floor, but Paige scraped away a layer of paint and found 2 round plugs. "Those aren't legs," she said. "They're bolt covers." Sean worked the first plug loose. Beneath it sat the head of a bronze bolt. "Other side too," Thomas said. Paige removed the second plug. The bolts didn't fasten the bench to the floor. They passed through slotted metal brackets, allowing the whole seat to lift slightly once they were loosened. "Paul made it removable," Sean said. "Serviceable," Thomas corrected. "Removable means you can take it out without swearing." They loosened both bolts. The bench rose less than an inch before the back rail caught against the wall. Sean checked the painted screws. 2 were ordinary steel. The other 2 had narrow heads with square centers. "I don't have that bit." Paige returned to her shed and came back with a small case. "Marine cabinet screws." Thomas smiled. "You do keep everything. I label mine." With the proper bit, the 2 square screws came out cleanly. The ordinary screws turned once, then stopped. Paint and corrosion held them. Sean could have forced them. Instead, he brushed solvent around each head and waited. The careful pace bothered him, but damaging the bench would destroy the very thing he was trying to understand. While the solvent worked, Thomas walked onto the pier. Sean followed him outside. "How high did the water get during that surge?" he asked. Thomas pointed to a scar on the booth siding, just below the ticket window. "About there. That would put the old floor underwater." It did. Why didn't Paul raise the whole floor? Door clearance, maybe? Maybe? Thomas looked across the river. "You want me to remember his reasons? I remember his work." Sean rested one hand on the rail. "Did Heather ever come down here with him?" "Not for maintenance." "Did I?" "Sometimes. Usually when something had already broken." That answer stayed with Sean. Paul had called him when he needed a motor lifted or a stubborn bolt cut free. Sean came, fixed the immediate problem, and left. He'd believed that was his place beside Paul. Thomas and Paige had been present for the ordinary days, when nothing dramatic was wrong. Sean had waited to be needed. Then he'd mistaken being summoned for belonging. A dark blue car turned into the marina entrance. It stopped near the office, and a woman stepped out holding a folder and a pair of sunglasses. Paige walked over from the service shed. After a short conversation, she pointed toward Sean. The woman approached the landing. "Sean Coleman?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Maria Rojas. I direct the Regional Passenger Ferry Cooperative." She offered her hand. Her grip was firm and brief. "I heard somebody was stabilizing Coleman Landing," she said. "Where did you hear that?" "Boat people talk, usually before anything is true." Thomas returned from the pier. Maria recognized him at once. "Captain Ross." "Not for a while. You still look disappointed when somebody ties a bad knot." "I still am." Maria smiled, then turned to Sean. May I look at the landing? The pier's cleared for foot traffic. The booth is open, but we're working on the floor. I won't touch anything. Sean unlocked the shore gate. Maria walked the pier slowly. She looked at the channel approach, the distance to Page's fuel dock, and the shore access from Ferry Point Road. She took no photographs until she asked permission. What's this about? Sean said. The cooperative has been trying to restore a passenger route across this part of the river. Since service ended, on and off, most sites don't work. They lack safe approach, road access, or enough waterfront control to keep other traffic clear. Page joined them. My fuel dock can't move. I'm not asking it to, Maria said. The old ferry approach is separate if the landing frontage remains intact. Sean looked toward the shore. What do you mean by frontage? The water boundary attached to the landing parcel. I bought the booth and the parcel under it. Maria opened her folder. Inside was an old operating diagram, not a property survey. It showed the ferry route, the booth, and a marked approach extending along the water. This tells me how service used the site, she said. It does not tell me what you own. Then what do you need? A current title description and a recorded plat. If your parcel controls the full landing edge, we can talk. If you own only the footprint beneath that booth, we can't operate here. Why not use an agreement with Page for the rest? Because fuel traffic and ferry traffic need separate control. Her marina has its own operation. The cooperative can't promise a route if access depends on several owners changing their minds. Page nodded slowly. The answer didn't dismiss her business. It protected it. What kind of talk? Sean asked. Annual use, scheduled service, maintenance duties, insurance. I won't offer terms until I know who controls what. Sean glanced toward the booth. The brass tag beneath the floor carried the same parcel number as Heather's conveyance, but that still told him nothing about the boundary. Would service pay enough to maintain the pier? He asked. If the frontage is what the old diagram suggests, it could. Maria closed the folder. I'll give you my card. Call when you have a title report. I don't have a title report. Then that's your next step. She walked back to her car after speaking briefly with Thomas. Paige watched her leave. That's why Paul kept the approach clear, she said. We don't know that. No, but now we know somebody still needs it. Thomas looked at the empty channel. Paul expected need to come back before people were ready for it. Sean returned to the booth. The solvent had loosened one screw. The other still held. He removed the first, then stopped. Maria's visit had changed the question. Opening the panel might tell him why Paul marked the joist cavity, but it wouldn't establish a legal boundary. For that, he needed the recorded conveyance and whatever survey supported it. He photographed the brass tag again, this time beside the parcel number, on his copy of the sale paper. Then he called Heather. What now? She asked. I need the full recorded conveyance. I told you I'd send it. You sent a recording receipt. The instrument number is on it. You can request a copy. You already have one. Heather was silent. I also need the plat referenced in the description, Sean said. Why? I'm checking the parcel boundaries. For the booth? For the property I bought? You bought a liability for $6. Now you're spending thousands trying to make it into something else. I'm asking for the file. What started this? Sean looked at Paige. She shook her head slightly. He understood. Maria had approached him in confidence, and Heather had no claim to that discussion. I found the parcel number stamped inside the floor, he said. Heather didn't respond. Did you know it was there? He asked. No. Her answer sounded different from the quick denial about the keys. Not dishonest exactly. More careful. Send me the conveyance and plat, Sean said. I'll look. Today. I have work, Sean. So do I. He ended the call before she could set another schedule for him. A minute later, his phone buzzed with a message. Heather had written, do not remove or destroy anything that may have come from Granddad's estate until we determine whether it was included in the sale. Sean read it twice. The brass tag had given him a useful connection. It had also told Heather that the floor contained something she hadn't accounted for. He showed the message to Paige and Thomas. Then he closed the booth, locked both shutters, and replaced the chain on the shore gate. Heather sent no file that night. By morning, she had sent a second message. It said she had spoken with someone who'd seen Maria's car at the marina. She wanted to know whether Sean was negotiating with the ferry cooperative. He read the message while standing at the booth counter. Paige was checking the square screws they'd removed from the bench. Thomas sat outside with coffee. Sean wrote back. Maria inspected the landing. Nothing has been offered. Heather called immediately. You should have told me, she said. Why? Because the estate conveyed the property based on its known condition and use. You sold me a parcel. You didn't rent me a use. You paid $6. That was your price. Don't do that. Do what? Act like the amount had nothing to do with the condition. Sean looked down at the open seam beside the oak panel. You said nobody wanted it. Nobody did. Maria came because the pier was stabilized. And who paid for that? I did. Heather took a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. This is getting out of hand. I'm willing to reverse the conveyance. What does that mean? The estate returns your payment. You sign the parcel back, and I deal with the structure. You'll give me $6. I'll discuss reasonable documented costs. $9,400 is documented. I'm not promising that amount. Then you're not reversing anything. I'm trying to keep you from losing more. You were ready to pay for demolition. That was before you made changes. The pier is safer than when you sold it. You don't know what's under that floor, neither do you. The silence lasted long enough for Sean to hear Thomas's folding chair creak outside. Heather said, "Don't open it? You don't get to tell me that. If Granddad stored personal property there, it may belong to the estate. The floor is part of my booth. The contents might not be. I'll document everything. With Paige standing there? With Paige and Thomas, they're not neutral. Neither are you." Heather's voice tightened. "Then don't expect me to keep helping you." Sean almost asked when she had helped. The answer came before he spoke. She had handled the funeral accounts, the taxes, the household bills, the sale company, and every form he hadn't wanted to face. She had done those things while he repaired a leaking porch roof and told himself they were dividing the work fairly. The arrangement had benefited him when grief made paperwork feel impossible. It had also allowed Heather to become the only person who knew what had been filed, sold, or discarded. "I need the recorded conveyance," he said. "You have the instrument number. You have the copy. You can obtain your own." She ended the call. The cost wasn't only the missing paper. Heather had just withdrawn the system Sean had depended on while resenting it. From then on, every answer would require him to ask someone else, pay for it, or learn how to find it himself. Paige came inside. "She offering $6?" she asked. "She said she'd discuss my costs." "That means no. I know what it means." Thomas appeared in the doorway. "You opening the floor?" "Yes." "Then do it clean." Sean placed his phone on the counter with the camera running. He photographed the threshold, the shifted panel, the brass tag, the bench bolts, and each screw before anyone moved them. Paige watched without teasing him. When the record was complete, they lifted the bench together. It rose from the slotted brackets and came away from the wall. They carried it outside and set it on padded boards beneath the ticket window. The floor seam continued to the river wall. Without the bench covering it, the shape became clear. The sliding oak section was almost 4 feet long and a little wider than Sean's shoulders. One end had a shallow handhold cut underneath, hidden by the seat rail. Thomas crouched beside it. Paul made that to be opened. "You never saw the handhold? The bench was already in place when he brought me back." Sean put his fingers into the recess and pulled. The panel moved 2 inches, then stopped. Paige shone her flashlight along the channel. "Something's holding the far end." Sean reached through the first opening. His fingertips found a wooden catch mounted to the underside. "It turns." "Can you reach it?" Thomas asked. "Barely." He lay flat on the pine boards and slid his arm into the joist space. The edge pressed against his shoulder. He turned the catch a quarter circle. The panel released. Paige took hold of the hand recess, and together they slid the oak section away from the wall. It traveled quietly on 2 waxed runners. Underneath was the same joist cavity they'd seen beside the brass tag. It extended beneath the full length of the panel. The near end held nothing but dry leaves and 1 rusted nail. A fitted divider crossed the middle. Behind it, deeper under the riverside, lay an oilcloth packet. Nobody reached for it. The packet was long and flat, wrapped in dark cloth folded around itself. Waxed cord held it closed. The wood around it was dry. Paul had lined that end of the cavity with thin cedar boards and raised the packet on 2 narrow strips so it wouldn't sit against the bottom. Thomas removed his cap. "That was his work," he said. "You recognize a box?" Paige asked. "I recognize how he kept water from sitting where he didn't want it." Sean photographed the packet in place. Then he put on clean gloves and lifted it with both hands. It was heavier than folded paper should have been. One corner was stiff beneath the cloth. He carried it to the counter. "Do we call Heather?" Paige asked. Sean looked at his phone. If we call her now, she'll tell us not to open it. She already did. This is Granddad's property, he said. Thomas put his cap on the bench outside. It was inside the landing he gave you no chance to understand. He didn't give it to me. Heather sold it. Paul built that space. Sean looked at the packet again. The distinction mattered. So did the fact that none of them knew what was inside. We open it on camera, he said. We touch as little as possible. If it's personal, we stop. Paige positioned the phone above the counter. Thomas stood where the camera could see his hands. Sean loosened the waxed cord. It had stiffened, but remained intact. The oilcloth unfolded in 3 layers. Inside was a second wrapping made from heavy brown paper. A faint smell of cedar and machine oil rose from it. The first item was a small maintenance ledger. Paul's name was written inside the cover. Dates filled the pages, followed by short entries for pier bolts, paint, roof patches, drain clearing, and storm checks. The entries continued after passenger service ended. Paige turned the pages carefully. There are my initials, she said. He wrote down the days I helped. Thomas leaned over. Mine too. The ledger didn't explain ownership. It did confirm that Paul's work had been planned, recorded, and shared. He had not been wandering down to the river out of habit. Beneath it lay a folded waterfront plat. Sean opened it only far enough to see the title and parcel code. 014. B appeared in the upper corner. Dark boundary lines ran from Ferry Point Road toward the river, then turned along a stretch of shoreline wider than the booth. Maria's old operating diagram came back to him. Is that the frontage? Paige asked. It looks like it. Don't assume, Thomas said. Sean nodded. We need someone who reads plats. The next paper had a heavy seal pressed near the bottom. It appeared to be an original deed. Paul's name was typed on the first page, along with the name of the person who had sold him the property decades earlier. Sean didn't unfold the legal description. If that's real, Paige said, why was it under the floor? We don't know that it's real, Sean said. Thomas frowned. You think Paul made it? I think we don't decide. A plain envelope rested beneath the deed. Sean, or the one who keeps the landing, was written across the front. Sean stopped breathing for a moment. Paige looked away from the envelope and toward him. Thomas remained still. That's his handwriting, Sean said. Yes, Thomas said. You're sure? I saw it on manifest for 30 years. Sean turned the envelope over. The flap had been sealed with ordinary glue, not wax. He opened it along the edge with a thin blade. The letter inside covered 2 pages. Paul began without greeting. He wrote that the landing had always required more work than it returned in money. That was why people misunderstood it. Sean read that sentence aloud, then continued in silence. Paul explained that the separate parcel had been kept intact because the town might need the crossing again. The proof belonged with the structure, he wrote, where a person willing to repair the landing would have a chance of finding it. Paige rested both hands on the counter. Sean reached the final paragraph. If Heather closes the estate, he read, she will do it by the paper she can see. Don't blame her for being herself, but don't let speed decide what the river still needs. He stopped. Thomas looked through the ticket window. There's more, Paige said quietly. Sean read the last lines to himself first. Paul had not named a favorite. He had named a duty. The landing should belong to whoever accepted its work, kept it safe, and left it available to the town if service returned. Sean folded the letter along its original crease. He had wanted the booth because nobody else wanted it. Then he'd wanted to make it useful enough to justify the money he spent. Both goals now felt too small. The packet suggested the parcel might include the full landing frontage. It suggested Paul expected someone to protect it from a hurried estate closing. But a hidden deed was not the same as a valid title, and a dead man's letter could not settle the question by itself. Sean looked at the maintenance ledger, the plat, and the sealed deed. If this is what it appears to be, Maria doesn't just need the booth, he said. She needs something Granddad kept separate for a reason. Paige nodded. And Heather will want it back. Thomas said nothing. He didn't need to. Sean slid each paper into a clean archival sleeve Paige brought from the marina office. He kept the original order and recorded the process. Then he placed the wrapped packet inside a waterproof document case. He did not return it to the floor. What's the plan? Paige asked. Find out if the deed is real. Find out what Heather actually conveyed. Then decide what protects the landing. What about the repair counter? Sean looked at the cleared counter and the tools waiting beneath it. It can't be the only reason I stay. He closed the sliding panel without fastening the bench over it. The cavity had changed the landing from a place Sean hoped to use into a responsibility he didn't yet know he owned. He carried the document case to his truck and locked it behind the seat. Then he opened the notebook to a clean page and wrote one name at the top: Maria Rojas. Beneath it, he wrote 3 questions. What does she require? What does the recorded parcel include? Who can verify the packet? He didn't call Heather again. Maria answered on the second ring. Sean told her they had found old property papers inside the booth. He did not call them proof, and he did not describe Paul's letter. Are they recorded copies? She asked. One looks original. Looks original isn't enough. I know. Who do you use for title work? Maria gave him 2 names and told him to choose for himself. If I recommend one, and the answer favors the cooperative, your sister will say, I bought the answer, she said. She might say that anyway. Then don't make it easy. Sean called a licensed title examiner whose office was in a brick building near the county courthouse. Her name was Ellen Hart. She agreed to meet the following morning after Sean explained that the parcel had already been conveyed through an estate. Bring the recorded instrument if you have it, she said. I have the recording number and a meeting copy. Then stop at the clerk's counter first. Ask for a certified copy. Heather has one. That doesn't help me unless she gives it to you. Sean understood the point. I'll get my own. The next morning, he stood at the clerk's counter with the instrument number on his phone. He expected questions about the estate or Heather's authority. The clerk asked only whether he wanted a plain copy or a certified one. Certified. He paid the copy charge and waited while the pages printed. The quitclaim was 4 pages, not the single signature page Heather had shown at the dining table. His name appeared as the person receiving the property. Heather's appeared as executor. The price was written plainly. The description referred to Parcel 014B and an older waterfront plat. Sean read every page in the courthouse hallway. Nothing said wooden booth. Nothing used the word shed. Nothing limited the transfer to the footprint beneath the structure. The paper still didn't tell him, in ordinary language, how much shore he owned. It did confirm that Heather's description at the table had been incomplete. She had conveyed a numbered parcel, not an object sitting by the river. That was a small answer, but it was his answer now. He had obtained it without waiting for Heather to decide when he deserved it. Ellen's office smelled faintly of toner and coffee. Frame maps covered one wall. Her desk held no loose stacks, only a laptop, a scanner, and a yellow pad. Sean placed the waterproof case in front of her. I photographed everything before we moved it, he said. Show me those first. She watched the video from the booth. She paused at the brass tag, the opening of the packet, and the first view of the deed. Who was present? Paige Coleman and Thomas Ross. Relation? Paige is my cousin. Thomas worked the landing with my grandfather. Did either handle the documents before the recording began? No. Did you? Only the floor panel. Ellen wrote that down. Then she opened the case and examined the sleeves without removing their contents. I need your permission to inspect the paper directly, she said. That can include checking the seal, watermarks, ink, impressions, and physical wear. I'll also compare this deed and plat against recorded entries. Will that damage them? It shouldn't. If I need a test that could leave a mark, I'll ask first. How long? A preliminary chain review, several business days. A certified finding takes longer, especially if the older plat is archived. Sean slid the courthouse copy across the desk. Does this convey the whole parcel? It conveys whatever Parcel 014B legally contained at the time of recording. That's not what I asked. It's the only honest answer before I check the chain. She pointed to the plat reference. This number connects the new conveyance to an older description. Your hidden packet may support that connection. It may also be outdated, incomplete, or unrelated to the current boundary. I won't know until I compare it. Maria says the full waterfront frontage could support ferry service. Then you have another reason not to rush. Ellen gave him a receipt for the original packet and sealed the case in a storage envelope while he watched. She also made working scans, returning Paul's letter and maintenance ledger to Sean because they weren't required for the first title check. I may need the ledger later for context, she said, not as ownership proof. What about the letter? It explains intent. It does not transfer land. Sean appreciated the plainness of that. "Will you contact Heather?" he asked. "If the recorded chain raises a question about the estate conveyance, yes. I'll also request the closing file because she signed as executor. She won't like that. Liking it isn't part of the examination." Ellen left the room with the sealed packet. Sean paid the initial fee from what remained of his savings. It wasn't close to the pier cost, but he felt every dollar now. Outside, he called Maria. The examination started. "Good. Don't send me the hidden papers. I wasn't planning to. People send too much when they want an answer. What can you do while we wait?" Maria considered that. "I can measure the operational site. Channel approach, boarding height, road access, passenger path. None of that promises an agreement. It tells us whether the place works." "Yes. Come tomorrow." Maria arrived the next afternoon with a measuring wheel, a tide gauge, and 2 orange cones. Paige moved a hose from the passenger path. Thomas watched from the ticket window while Sean opened the shore gate. Maria began at Ferry Point Road and rolled the wheel toward the pier. She measured the clear width beside the booth, the distance to Paige's fuel line, and the space where passengers could wait without entering the marina work area. At the boarding edge, she crouched and checked the height above the water. "This is close to what we need," she said. "Close good or close bad?" Sean asked. "Good at this tide? We'd need an adjustable landing plate. Can that attach without rebuilding the pier?" "It should. Your new bracing helps." Paige stood near the fuel shed with her arms crossed. "How many people are you imagining? Not enough to crowd your yard. Scheduled crossings, not continuous service. And parking? Off-site arrangement or limited reservations parking. Your customer spaces stay yours." Paige nodded. Maria had come prepared to treat the marina as a neighboring business, not free support for the ferry. They walked the old approach together. Thomas pointed out where the former boat held position in a crosswind. Maria marked the location on her diagram. Sean returned to the booth and replaced the rotten threshold while they worked. He had cut a new piece of white oak and sealed the underside. Before setting it, he treated the sill and repaired the corner of the door frame. The new threshold fitted on the second try. When he lowered it into place, the door closed without scraping. He opened it, closed it, then opened it again. Thomas looked over, planning to wear it out. It hasn't done that in years. Sean fastened the threshold with bronze screws so it could be removed without damaging the pine floor. The first repair he'd begun was finally complete. It didn't hide the sliding panel or block access to the cavity. Maria stepped into the booth and tested the path through the doorway. "This could work as ticketing," she said. "Half the counter would be repair intake. That could work too if tools stay clear during service." Sean had expected her to object. "You'd share it? The cooperative needs a safe landing, not an empty room." That answer mattered. Paul's duty didn't require Sean to surrender the useful work he had imagined. The ferry and repair counter could support the same place. Maria finished her measurements near sunset. She stood with Sean at the end of the pier while Paige locked the marina office. "If the title examiner confirms the full frontage, I can take a proposal to our board," Maria said. "What would the proposal cover?" "Annual payment for scheduled use, insurance during operations, and shared maintenance duties. Enough to keep the pier safe? If the board accepts the site, yes." She looked toward the booth. "But if the frontage is divided or your sister challenges control, we stop until it's settled. We don't build service on a family argument." "Fair. Is it?" "No. It's sensible." Maria packed her tools into the car. The orange cones went into the trunk last. Heather's vehicle passed the marina entrance while Maria was closing it. The brake lights came on. For a moment, Heather's car remained in the road. Then it reversed and turned into the gravel lot. She parked beside Sean's truck but didn't get out until Maria drove away. "What was she doing here?" Heather asked. "Measuring the landing? For what? To see if service is practical." Heather looked at the repaired pier, the open gate, and the new threshold. "You said there was no offer? There isn't. But you're planning one. I'm finding out what the property can support. With documents from Granddad's estate. With documents found inside my floor." Heather's gaze went to the booth. "Where are they?" "Safe." "That isn't an answer. It's the answer you need. I'm still responsible for estate property." "You're responsible for the estate. This parcel was recorded to me. You don't know what was recorded. I have a certified copy now." Heather's face changed. "You went to the courthouse." "Yes. You could have waited for me to send it. I did wait." She glanced toward Paige, who was locking the fuel pump. "And the old deed? It's being examined. By whom?" a licensed title examiner. Heather looked back at him. Without notifying me, I don't need your approval to examine my title. If you're claiming the estate conveyed more than intended, you absolutely need to involve me. I'm not claiming anything yet. You brought a ferry director here to measure, because I'm done waiting until every question has only one answer left. Heather stepped closer. What did Granddad's letter say? Sean hadn't told her there was a letter. He kept his face still. Who said there was one? Her eyes moved away for a fraction of a second. The sale company contacted me, she said. You've been asking about his tools. They mentioned papers could have been stored with workshop items. That doesn't explain how you know about a letter. You said documents? No, you said letter. Paige had stopped beside the pump. Thomas remained inside the booth, silent. Heather folded her arms. I know how Granddad kept things. Of course there'd be a note. Sean didn't believe that was all she knew. He also had no proof she knew more. I'll contact you when the examination is complete, he said. You'll contact me before you sign anything with Maria. That depends on what the title shows. Heather looked toward the open ticket window. The booth was no longer hidden behind weeds. The pier stood level. Maria's measuring wheel had left a narrow track through the gravel. Sean's plan had become visible enough to oppose. That night, Ellen emailed him. She had located the archive plat reference. Before she could issue a finding, she needed the estate's full closing file and a response from Heather as executor. She had already sent the request. Ellen called before 8 the next morning. Heather responded, she said. Sean sat up in bed. That was quick. She did not send the full closing file. What did she send? A written statement saying the estate intended to convey only the booth and the ground immediately supporting it. Sean put his feet on the floor. The recorded paper says, Parcel 014B. I know what it says. Can she change it by writing something else now? She can raise a dispute. I have to examine it. Does that stop your finding? It stops me from issuing one today. Sean walked to the kitchen and turned on the light. He hadn't slept well. Paul's letter was locked in a fire-resistant case beneath his workbench, and every noise in the night had made him think of the landing. What does she say about the hidden deed? He asked. That it may be estate property and should be returned before examination continues. You have it, I do. It remains sealed in my custody. Can she take it? Not from me without your consent or a proper order. Sean heard the restraint in Ellen's answer. She wasn't promising to protect him from every claim. She was telling him what was true that morning. What do you need? He asked. The complete estate file would be fastest. Without it, I can rebuild the chain from public records and archive material. How much longer? At least another week, possibly more. And the cost? Higher. I'll send a revised estimate before I proceed. Sean looked toward the dark window above the sink. Send it. There's something else. Your sister copied the Ferry Cooperative on her dispute notice. Sean stood still. She sent it to Maria? Yes. He thanked Ellen and ended the call. Maria's message arrived while he was dressing. She asked him to call before going to the landing. When he did, her voice was direct. I have to suspend the site proposal. You haven't even seen the title result. That's why I'm suspending it, not rejecting it. Heather doesn't own the parcel. She says you don't control the frontage. She signed the transfer. And now she disputes the scope. My board will not approve work while that remains unresolved. What about your measurements? They're valid. The site works physically, so keep preparing. I can't spend cooperative money preparing an agreement for disputed land. Sean gripped the phone. Maria let the silence sit. I told you this could happen, she said. You told me you needed a title report. I still do. She sent one email and everything stops. One email did not create the problem. The unclear chain did. It wasn't unclear to her when she wanted the parcel gone. That may matter to your examiner. It doesn't remove my duty to the cooperative. Sean knew she was right. That didn't make the loss smaller. When the title is confirmed, will you come back? He asked. If the full frontage is yours, yes. And if it isn't, then this landing cannot support our service. Maria ended the call after promising to preserve her field notes. The measurements, the safe pier, and the open ticket path had moved the project forward for one day. Heather's notice had moved it back out of reach. At the marina, Paige was already replacing a hose on the fuel pump. Sean told her what happened. She contacted Maria directly, Paige asked. She copied the cooperative. Paige dropped the wrench into her tray. That wasn't about liability. No. She wants the landing back, or she wants it useless. Same result for me. Paige looked toward the empty slips along the outer row. 2 had been vacant since spring. Passenger traffic wouldn't fill them by itself, but people at the landing would buy fuel, supplies, drinks, and small repairs. She had spent time helping because the place offered a practical future. "I can keep giving you labor," she said. "I can't reserve marina space for a service that may never come. I'm not asking you to. You're using the passenger path beside my yard. I'll close it until the title is settled. That isn't what I want. It's what keeps you out of the dispute." Paige studied him. "You're getting good at deciding for people." The words found a sore place. "I'm trying not to make your business pay for my family." "Then ask what my business can carry." Sean looked at the hose lying between them. "What can it carry? A few weeks. Access for inspections. Labor when I have it. Not legal costs, not insurance, and not an empty path forever. That's fair. And if Heather comes through my gate, I send her to you. That's more than fair." Paige picked up the wrench. "Good. Now hold this fitting." They worked until the new hose stopped leaking. It was a small task, but finishing it settled something between them. Paige hadn't withdrawn. She had named the limit of what she could promise, and Sean had listened. Near noon, Heather called. "I want to meet at the landing," she said. "You know you have to call before coming. I'm calling." "When? I'm at the road." Sean looked toward the entrance. Her car was waiting beyond the marina gate. "Stay there," he said. "I'll open it." He met her at the gravel edge and unlocked the chain. Heather carried a slim folder, not the estate file Ellen had requested. They went into the booth. The bench remained outside because Sean hadn't reinstalled it over the sliding panel. The new threshold was clean against the old pine floor. Heather noticed the missing seat. "Where is it?" "Protected. You took the floor apart." "I opened a panel Granddad built to open." She set the folder on the counter. "You need to stop treating every decision he made as an instruction." "Then why did you ask about his letter?" "I told you. I assumed. Before you'd seen the cavity." Heather did not answer. Sean waited, but she opened the folder instead. Inside was a typed offer. The estate would reimburse his documented stabilization expense and return his purchase payment if he conveyed the property back. It would also cover the title examination costs already incurred. Sean read it twice. "You're offering the full $9,400 now. You said that was your concern. It wasn't your concern last week. I didn't know you were talking to Maria. You still don't know what she'd offer. I know enough." "What do you know?" "That a Ferry cooperative doesn't measure worthless land." Heather pushed a pen toward him. "You can walk away without losing money. That is more than fair." "What happens to the booth?" "The estate evaluates its options. Demolition, if that remains the safest choice. And the landing? That depends on what the estate confirms." Sean placed the offer on the counter. "You told Ellen I bought only the booth. That's what we discussed. You told me I was buying the parcel. I told you the booth sat on a separate parcel. No one understood that you might claim the entire waterfront. No one asked what the number meant. You signed anyway. So did you." Heather's mouth tightened. The paper between them offered Sean exactly what he had wished for during the first night after the pier estimate. His savings could return. The title bill could disappear. He could stop worrying about insurance, storms, and whether a dead man's papers would survive a family dispute. He could also return the one place where he had finally begun acting without waiting to be assigned a task. "This is a good offer," Heather said. "For the money I spent. For your peace of mind. You don't get to decide what buys that. I'm trying to keep this from turning into a fight. You sent your dispute to Maria because she needed to know. You didn't copy me. You knew your own claim." Sean looked out the ticket window. Paige was serving a boat at the fuel dock. Thomas's empty chair stood beneath the shade beside the office. "If I sign this," he said, "will you keep the landing available for ferry service?" "I can't promise that." "Will you keep the pier?" "I can't promise that either." "Then I'm not signing." Heather's face changed, but she stayed calm. "Granddad's letter made you feel chosen." "No, it had your name on it. It also said, 'Whoever keeps the landing.' You think that means you. I think it means the work matters more than the name. That sounds like something you want it to mean." "Maybe. That's why I hired an examiner." Heather closed the folder. "An examiner tells you what a paper says. She doesn't tell you what Granddad intended." "No, the letter does that." "A letter you haven't shown me." Sean felt the pull to defend Paul's words, to read them aloud and make Heather admit what they meant. That would turn the letter into another family argument. It wasn't the leverage that could settle ownership. "You'll see what's relevant when the title work is done," he said. You're keeping Granddad's own words from the executor. You're using the executor role to reach property you conveyed away. Heather picked up the folder. If you continue, the reimbursement offer ends. I understand. If the examiner rules against you, I won't cover another dollar. I understand. And the cooperative may not wait. I know. She walked out of the booth, leaving the pen on the counter. Sean locked the gate after her. Ellen's revised estimate was waiting on his phone. The additional work would take money he had set aside for roof materials and electrical service. Until the chain was settled, the repair counter could operate only in a limited way, and Maria's proposal would remain suspended. He opened his banking app. For once, he did not look at the balance and imagine what Heather would say if it disappeared. He paid the examination deposit and signed the authorization for Ellen to reconstruct the full chain. He also authorized her to share the deed, plat, and relevant parts of the maintenance record with Heather for response. The private lines of Paul's letter remained protected, unless Ellen determined they were necessary. The certified finding would have to carry the claim. No family memory, hidden note, or hopeful plan could do it instead. Sean sent the signed authorization. Then he opened the shore gate, walked to the end of the pier, and accepted that keeping it might cost him the last money he had saved. The water was low enough to expose the dark line on the pilings. Sean stayed there until a workboat passed, and its wake moved through the new braces without shaking the deck. When he returned to shore, Paige was waiting beside the gate. "You paid it," she said. "The examination? I saw your face." "Yes." "How much do you have left?" "Enough. That's not a number. It's the number I'm giving." Paige accepted the boundary, though she didn't like it. "Then we make the booth weather-tight with what we already have," she said. "I've got half a roll of roof membrane and a box of stainless fasteners. I'll pay for them." "No. They were left from my pump shed. Your business needs them eventually. My business needs that landing alive." Sean unlocked the booth. "Keep a list. I always keep a list." Over the next week, they worked around the title examination. Paige sealed the roof patch while Sean repaired the window latch. Thomas cleaned and oiled the bell mechanism at the counter. The oak panel remained accessible, covered by a fitted sheet of plywood when they weren't inspecting it. The bench stayed outside beneath a tarp. Nothing they did changed the ownership question. That helped. Work gave them something honest to finish while the papers were being tested. Ellen called twice with narrow questions. The first was about the packet's wrapping. Sean described the oilcloth, waxed cord, and cedar lining. He sent her the full video rather than selected images. The second was for Thomas. Ellen wanted to know whether he would identify Paul's handwriting in a signed statement. Thomas agreed, but only after reading the letter himself again. They met at Ellen's office the following afternoon. Thomas sat upright across from her desk, with his glasses low on his nose. The original letter rested inside a clear sleeve between them. "How often did you see Paul Coleman write?" Ellen asked. "Every operating day for years." "What did he write?" "Passenger counts, fuel notes, weather, repairs, complaints about my handwriting." "Did he sign those records?" "Some." "Are you familiar with the writing on this envelope?" "Yes." "How?" Thomas pointed without touching it. He made his capital S too narrow. His R had a long leg. When he wrote fast, the second part of an M sat lower. Ellen placed a copy of an old Ferry manifest beside the envelope. Thomas had brought it from a box of his own records. "That is his writing too?" she asked. "Yes." "And the letter?" "Yes." "Did you see him write it?" "No." "Did he tell you he had written it?" "No." Ellen wrote each answer exactly as Thomas gave it. Sean sat beside him, listening. Thomas could support what he knew, but he wouldn't stretch memory to help. That made his statement useful. After Thomas signed, Ellen returned the manifest. "The handwriting supports the packet's history," she told Sean. "It doesn't decide title. I understand. Good. People hear the word authenticated and assume every item proves every fact. It doesn't." Thomas put the manifest back in its folder. Paper should only do its own job. Ellen looked at him. "That's exactly right." 2 days later, she asked Sean to come alone. The sealed packet was on her desk when he arrived. Beside it lay several certified record copies and an enlarged waterfront plat. Ellen closed the office door. "I completed the chain review," she said. Sean sat down but didn't remove his coat. She turned the enlarged plat toward him. "This is the recorded map referenced by the deed in your packet and by the recent quitclaim. The boundary began at Ferry Point Road. It ran past the booth, continued along the landing edge, and reached the river around the old ferry approach. The full frontage Maria had measured sat inside the marked lines. Sean followed it with his eyes. No division, he asked. None recorded. No strip held back for the estate? None. What about Page's marina? Separate parcel. The line between them is clear. Ellen placed a copy of the older recorded deed beside Paul's original. The paper, seal, signatures, and notary impression are consistent with the recorded deed from when Paul acquired the landing. The legal description matches. The plat reference matches. I found no later transfer removing any part of Parcel 014B and Heather's quitclaim. It uses that same parcel number and incorporates the same recorded description. It does not reserve the frontage. It does not limit the transfer to the booth. Sean looked again at the wide shape on the plat. So, I own the landing. I'm certifying that the recorded quitclaim transferred the entire landing parcel to you. The words did not feel like rescue. They felt like weight settling into place. Heather's signature had done the transferring. Paul's papers had allowed Ellen to confirm what the number meant. No hidden letter had handed Sean land from beneath a floor. The chain already existed. He had simply paid to make it visible. Could Heather's statement change that? He asked. Her statement raises a claim about what she intended. It does not change the description she signed and recorded. What happens if she keeps challenging it? That is a question for counsel, not a title examiner. My job is to certify the record I examined. Ellen slid a draft finding across the desk. I sent her the factual chain yesterday. She had until noon today to identify any missing recorded instrument. Did she? She sent the estate inventory and the closing worksheet. Were they missing something? The inventory listed Parcel 014B as a separate landing parcel. The worksheet assigned the $6 value. Sean read that line twice. She had that description. Yes. Did it show the boundaries? No. It referenced the same plat. She may not have pulled it. That mattered to him. Heather had moved too quickly. She had not necessarily sat at the dining table knowing she was handing away a valuable waterfront parcel. Her certainty had come from not looking closely. Did she send anything else? He asked. A request that I delay certification until you reconvey. That isn't a title record. No. Ellen placed one final page on top of the report. It carried her seal and signature. This is my certified finding. I will release certified copies after you confirm the names of the recipients. Maria gets one. That makes sense. Heather, too. She's already listed. Paige doesn't need the full report. Just the boundary page affecting her marina. Ellen noted it. What about Paul's letter? Sean asked. It remains supporting context. I cited the maintenance ledger only to identify the parcel's continued use. I did not rely on the letter for ownership. Good. You sound relieved. I don't want a private letter deciding public land. Ellen returned the original packet to him in the waterproof case. The deed and plat now carried small examination sleeves with her reference marks. Nothing had been altered. Your sister asked for a meeting before this goes to the cooperative, she said. Here, she suggested the family house. Sean looked at the boundary map. No, you don't have to meet at all. I'll meet. Not there. The house belonged to Heather now. At that dining table, she controlled the papers, the time, and who could read what. Sean didn't need to repeat that arrangement. The landing, he said, inside the booth. Ellen raised an eyebrow. There isn't much room. There's enough? Who attends? Heather. You. Maria. Paige and Thomas. That's not a private title meeting. It isn't only title anymore. Maria needs to decide whether she can proceed. Paige needs her marina boundary protected. Thomas witnessed Granddad's work. Heather needs to hear what the record says from the person who examined it. And what do you need? Sean took a moment. To decide what happens with the land after I know it's mine. Ellen agreed to attend as long as everyone understood she would explain her finding, not negotiate for either side. Outside, Sean called Maria. He told her the examination was complete and asked her to bring any proposed operating terms, but not a final agreement. Why not final? She asked. Because I haven't agreed to the duties yet. The annual payment depends on those duties. Then explain them in the room. Maria agreed. Paige was less calm when Sean showed her the certified boundary page. She knew the estate inventory called it a separate landing parcel, she said. She may not have seen the plat. She didn't want to see it. That isn't the same as knowing. She tried to take it back after Maria came. I know. Paige walked to the open ticket window and looked toward the road. You could send the finding to every family email she used during the estate, she said. Let them see what $6 bought before she explains it for you. Sean pictured Heather opening those replies alone in the house. Some relatives would call her careless. Others would call him greedy. Nobody would care that Paul had kept a landing ready for the town. No, he said. She made the dispute public enough to stop Maria. I'm not hiding the finding. Then why protect her? I'm protecting the reason we did this. Paige turned around. Sean opened the waterproof case and touched the sleeve containing Paul's letter. I could send this too, he said. The line about speed, the line about Heather. It would hurt her more than the plat. Maybe she needs to read it. She will. In the room, after the title is settled. Not as a weapon, Paige's anger eased, though it didn't disappear. What if she still says the booth was all you bought? Then Ellen answers. And if she walks out, then Maria still hears the finding. The easier choice would have been to use every private word Paul left, shame Heather into silence, and call that victory. Sean no longer needed her approval, but that did not mean he wanted her stripped of dignity. He needed a boundary that would survive after anger passed. The meeting was set for Friday morning. On Thursday evening, Sean and Paige carried the restored bench back inside. They installed it with the original slotted brackets and new removable fasteners. The sliding floor panel remained accessible beneath it. Thomas hung the old Ferry schedule behind the counter, not because the times were still useful, but because the frame covered a stain. Before leaving, Sean placed 6 $1 bills in the ticket drawer. He had no intention of giving them to Heather. He wanted the amount present when Ellen explained what Heather's signature had conveyed. The $6 were not the leverage. The certified finding beside them was. Friday morning arrived with steady rain. Water clicked against the booth roof and ran cleanly through the repaired drain. Sean opened both shutters despite the damp. He wanted everyone to see the pier, the marina line, and the river frontage while Ellen explained the finding. Paige brought 6 folding chairs from her office. Only 4 fit inside without blocking the door. Thomas took the bench. Maria stood beside the counter with a document case. Ellen placed 1 map tube and a slim folder beneath the ticket window. Heather arrived last. She stopped outside when she saw everyone. I thought this was a title meeting, she said. It is, Sean said. Then why is the cooperative here? Because your notice stopped its proposal. And Paige? The boundary affects her marina. Heather looked at Thomas. What does he own? Thomas folded his hands over the handle of his cane. Nothing here. Then why is he attending? Because I asked him, Sean said. Heather entered without removing her raincoat. Sean closed the door and remained beside it. The small room forced everyone close enough to hear a quiet voice. Ellen set a recorder on the counter. This is not a hearing, she said. I'm recording only with everyone's consent, so there is an accurate account of my title finding. Maria agreed. Paige and Thomas did the same. Heather looked at Sean. Are you recording too? No. After a pause, she consented. Ellen reached for her folder, but Heather put one hand on it. Before you begin, I need my position understood. Ellen withdrew her hand. Go ahead. Heather placed her own papers on the counter. The estate conveyed an abandoned structure for a nominal amount. Sean knew its condition. He knew removal might be required, and he knew the estate did not intend to transfer a valuable operating property. Sean said nothing. Heather turned toward Maria. The ferry booth was treated as a liability throughout the settlement. There was no negotiation for commercial waterfront. There was no appraisal of that kind of property. Maria listened without responding. Heather continued. The parcel number was used because the booth had to be identified for recording. It was never represented to Sean that he would receive the entire landing frontage. Paige shifted in her chair. Sean caught her eye and gave a slight shake of his head. Heather opened the estate inventory. This worksheet assigns $6 to the booth. That amount tells you what everyone believed was being transferred. Ellen said, Are you stating that the recorded description was a mistake? I'm stating that Sean bought the wooden booth. If the legal description reaches farther, then it does not reflect our agreement. There it was. Heather had moved beyond uncertainty. She was committing herself to a version in which the parcel number identified only enough ground to carry a rejected structure. She looked at Sean. You signed knowing what we discussed. I signed the instrument you gave me. You didn't ask for a survey, neither did you. I was closing an estate, not buying waterfront. You were conveying it. Heather's face tightened. Ellen raised one hand. Let her finish. Heather turned back to Maria. Until this is corrected, the estate maintains its objection to any commercial agreement involving the frontage. I won't withdraw that objection based on papers found beneath a floor. Is that your complete position? Ellen asked. Yes. Do you have a recorded instrument dividing the booth footprint from parcel 014B? No, because we did not believe a division was necessary. Do you have a deed reserving the pier or frontage to the estate? No. Any survey limiting Sean's conveyance? No. Heather looked impatient. You're asking for documents that wouldn't exist because no one intended a waterfront transaction. Ellen nodded once. Then I'll explain what does exist. Sean opened the ticket drawer. He removed the 6 $1 bills and placed them beside the certified quitclaim. Heather looked at the money, then at him. What is that supposed to prove? Only what I paid. Put it away. The amount is written in the instrument, Ellen said. The bills do not affect my finding. She unrolled the enlarged plat and held its corners with the brass bell and 2 ticket punches. This is the recorded waterfront plat referenced by Paul Coleman's deed. It identifies parcel 014B. The map showed the road, booth, pier, marina boundary, and river edge. Ellen traced the parcel line with the capped end of a pen. The boundary starts here at Ferry Point Road. It runs along the neighboring marina line, reaches the river, follows the full landing frontage, and returns along the opposite boundary. Heather leaned closer. That can't be the booth parcel. It is the parcel identified in the recorded plat. The booth sits here. Yes. Ellen pointed to the small marked rectangle within the larger boundary. The structure occupies part of the parcel. It is not the parcel. Heather picked up her inventory page and compared its reference number to the map. Ellen placed a certified copy of Paul's older deed beside it. This deed conveyed the complete parcel to Paul. The original found inside the floor matches the recorded version in its description, seal, signatures, and plat reference. She added a chain summary. I examined every later recorded transfer affecting this property. No section was divided. No frontage was conveyed away. No reservation was added. Heather looked at the pages without touching them. Ellen then placed the recent quitclaim in the center of the counter. This is the instrument you signed as executor. It conveys parcel 014B to Sean Coleman. It uses the same plat reference. It contains no limitation to the wooden booth, no footprint description, and no retained estate interest. Heather read the legal description. I relied on the closing worksheet, she said. The worksheet also identifies the asset as the separate landing parcel, Ellen replied. It valued the structure. It assigned a value to the listed property. I cannot tell you why that amount was chosen. You know $6 wasn't the value of this land. I know the amount written in the conveyance. A low price does not reduce a parcel's boundary. Rain moved across the roof in a heavier band. Maria stepped nearer to the map. The cooperative's measured operating path is inside these lines. Ellen looked at the site diagram Maria provided. Yes, the passenger approach and boarding edge shown on your diagram fall within parcel 014B. Page's marina remains outside it. Page exhaled. Heather looked from the map to the window. The full approach lay directly in front of her, level and repaired. What about the hidden letter? She asked. Does your finding rely on that? No, Ellen said. The maintenance ledger? It supports continued use and helps identify the packet. It does not carry the title, the brass tag. It connects the physical cavity to the parcel number. It does not transfer land. Heather touched the quitclaim with one finger. Then you're saying my signature did this? Yes. Not Paul's private wish, not Maria's interest, not Sean's work on the pier. Heather's recorded quitclaim had transferred the complete landing parcel. Ellen's certified examination made that one mechanism clear. Heather lowered herself into a folding chair. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Sean wanted relief to arrive. Instead, he noticed that Heather's raincoat sleeve was wet where it rested against the counter. She looked less like the executor who controlled the dining table and more like his sister after a serious mistake. I didn't pull the plat, she said. Ellen closed the chain folder. I found no indication that you did. Heather looked at Sean. Did you know when you signed? No. When did you know? When Ellen told me. You suspected. I knew Granddad marked the floor with the parcel number. I knew Maria needed the frontage. I did not know the conveyance included it. Heather turned to Maria. What is this property worth to the cooperative? Maria chose her words carefully. We are not buying it. That wasn't my question. Comparable operating waterfront can carry a property value above $100,000. I have not appraised this parcel. Heather's eyes closed briefly. Maria continued. Our proposal is for annual landing use. It does not transfer ownership. How much? $42,000 per year. Paige looked at Sean. Thomas remained still, though his fingers tightened once around his cane. Heather gave a quiet, disbelieving laugh. I valued it at $6. No, Ellen said. You conveyed it for $6. I cannot say how you valued it. Heather looked at the bills on the counter. The distinction hurt, but it was accurate. Maria opened her document case. This is still a family dispute unless the estate withdraws its scope objection. Ellen said, My certified finding resolves the record I examined. Heather's notice remains her statement, unless she retracts it. Everyone looked at Heather. Sean could have demanded an apology. He could have reminded her that she had tried to buy back the parcel after Maria arrived. He did neither. The objection is stopping service, he said. If you still believe there's another recorded paper, name it. Heather looked down at the plat. There isn't one. Then withdraw the notice. And if I don't, I give Maria the certified finding and protect the parcel through whatever next step is required. But I'd rather not spend more money proving the same boundary. Heather's jaw moved as if she were holding back an argument. Then she took out her phone. What exactly do you need me to write? Maria answered. That the estate withdraws its objection to Sean's control of Parcel 014B and makes no claim to the landing agreement, Heather typed. She showed the message to Ellen before sending it. Ellen read it once. That is clear. Heather sent the email to Maria, Ellen, and Sean. Maria checked her phone. Received. The power in the room changed without anyone raising a voice. Heather no longer spoke for the landing. She had performed the one action only she could perform, withdrawing the challenge she created. Sean returned the 6 bills to the drawer. Maria laid the proposed agreement on the counter. The annual payment is $42,000, she said. The cooperative carries operating insurance during scheduled service. It maintains the boarding equipment and contributes to ordinary pier upkeep. What stays with me? Sean asked. Structural maintenance outside our equipment, storm preparation for the booth, safe access on service days. The repair counter remains. Yes, with tools secured during passenger hours. Paige's fuel operation remains separate. Maria turned to Paige. The boundary schedule protects it. Any shared access requires her written approval. Paige nodded. The landing stays available to the town through scheduled service, Sean said. It can't become private event space that blocks crossings. Maria added a note to the operating schedule. Agreed. Thomas spoke for the first time since the map opened. Who rings the bell? Maria looked at Sean. The booth operator. That's him, Thomas said. Sean read each page. He asked about weather cancellations, repairs after a ferry strike, and who controlled the gate outside operating hours. Maria answered directly. Sean retained control of the booth and parcel. The cooperative received scheduled access, not ownership. When the last change was initialed, Maria signed. She turned the agreement around. Sean signed beneath her name. The landing had not become instant wealth. The first annual payment would be divided across the year, and much of it already had a job. Power needed restoration. The booth roof needed more than a patch. Boarding equipment had to be installed. Insurance, permits, and maintenance would continue, but the work could now sustain itself. Maria shook Sean's hand. I'll take this to our operations team this afternoon. When can service begin? If repairs stay on schedule, before the end of the season. Thomas looked through the open window toward the river. Heather remained seated. Ellen gathered her map and certified copies. Paige carried 2 chairs outside to give everyone space. Maria left with the signed agreement in her case. Thomas followed slowly, pausing to touch the bell. Soon only Sean and Heather remained in the booth. She looked at the waterproof case beneath the counter. You said I could see Granddad's letter after the title was settled. Sean closed the door against the rain. Then he took out the letter and handed it to her. Heather read the first page standing beside the counter. At the line about speed deciding what the river needed, she sat down again. She read the second page twice. Sean stayed by the door. Rainwater gathered beneath Heather's shoes and darkened the new threshold. When she finished, she folded the letter along Paul's crease. "He knew what I would do," she said. "He knew you'd close the estate. He made me sound predictable." "You were predictable." Heather looked up. "So were you. He put your name on the envelope because he knew you'd take the one thing nobody wanted. He put another name there too, the one who keeps the landing." "Yes, that still sounds like you." Sean took the letter from her and returned it to its sleeve. "He didn't give me the parcel with that letter. You did." Heather's eyes went to the ticket drawer. "For $6, for the amount you chose." She looked toward the river. "I thought you'd see the repairs and walk away." "I almost did." "You should have asked what the parcel included. You should have known before you signed it." Neither answer excused the other. Heather rubbed one thumb across the edge of her phone. "There is something I didn't tell you," she said. Sean waited. "Granddad said there was a letter at the landing." "When?" "The winter before he died." "What exactly did he say?" "He said, if somebody keeps the landing, there's a letter for them." "That was all. You knew before the settlement meeting. I knew he'd left another note somewhere. He left notes in coffee cans and drawers. Did you look for it?" "No. Why not?" "I was trying to close everything." "You were trying not to find another instruction." Heather looked at him then. "Yes," she said. It was the first answer she gave that did not protect her role. Sean leaned against the doorframe. "You asked me what the letter said before I told you there was one." "I shouldn't have. You also told Ellen it belonged to the estate. I was trying to stop you from signing with Maria before I understood what was happening. You understood enough to want the parcel back. I understood that I'd made a mistake. You called it my mistake until an hour ago." Heather's mouth tightened. "I withdrew the objection, because the finding left nothing to argue." "I could have kept arguing. That doesn't earn you anything." She stood. "I'm sorry I didn't pull the plat." Sean said nothing. "I'm sorry I treated the parcel like a shed. That isn't all of it." "No, it isn't." He waited again, but Heather didn't continue. She could admit to rushing. She could admit to missing the boundary. She was not ready to admit that she had arranged the family settlement, so Sean's agreement felt easier than resistance. "I won't apologize for handling the estate," she said. "You didn't want that work. I didn't. Every bill, tax notice, donation pickup, and creditor came to me. I know. You got to show up when something needed a wrench. I know that too." Heather seemed surprised he didn't fight her. Sean opened the door. "I depended on you to handle papers," he said. "You depended on me not to question them. Both things have to stop." "What does that mean for us?" "It means you call before you come here. You don't speak for the landing. You don't contact Maria about my agreement unless she contacts you. And the house? It's your house. Are you going to stop coming? I'm not coming over to fix things because you set a deadline. That isn't what I asked. It's what I'm answering." Heather picked up her folder. The space between them had not healed. It had become honest enough to see. "I have the complete closing file," she said. "I'll bring it tomorrow. Send a copy to Ellen. I will. And write that the estate makes no claim to the packet contents. The deed is already yours. The letter and ledger too." Heather nodded. "I'll write it." That was an action Sean could measure. It did not restore trust, but it stopped one more future argument. She left the booth and walked through the rain to her car. The next morning, a courier delivered the closing file and Heather's signed statement. Ellen confirmed that both matched what Heather had promised. Heather also included the sale company's contact information and a list of the garage tools that had been sold. The list did not return Paul's planes or brace set. It only confirmed when they had left and how little they brought. Sean folded it into his notebook. Some losses stayed losses. Maria arrived with 2 cooperative engineers and a written installation schedule. They marked the position for an adjustable boarding plate and inspected the pier connections. The stabilization passed their review. One engineer pointed to the booth wiring. "We need a separate service panel for ferry equipment." Sean opened the utility cabinet. "The conduit is intact. We'll test it." "Cooperative pays for the equipment circuit. Your repair counter stays on your service." Maria handed Sean a checklist. Emergency lighting, rail marking, gate control, weather notice board, and a clear counter during passenger hours. Sean read the dates. "You want all this in 3 weeks. I want service before the season changes. The roof still needs a full membrane. Is it leaking? No. Then roof replacement can follow opening. Safety items come first." Sean had spent years fixing whatever made the loudest complaint. Maria's list forced a different order. Useful work did not always begin with the part he wanted to touch. The The first agreement payment starts when operational work begins, she said. It arrives in monthly portions, so I don't get a large check today. No, good to know. Maria almost smiled. The annual amount sustains the landing if you budget it. It will not feel like $42,000 sitting in your hand. Sean looked at the checklist. Rail paint, electrical work, storm equipment, insurance, taxes, and pier reserves would take much of it. I didn't expect it to. He had hoped for a little breathing room. That would come later, if he kept the obligations under control. Until the first payment arrived, his savings remained low. He accepted 2 off-site engine jobs and spent 3 evenings working from his truck. The booth restoration moved more slowly because he still had rent, fuel, and ordinary life to pay for. Paige held him to their bargain about the launch trailer. On Saturday, she rolled 4 new rollers onto the gravel. We agreed on 3, Sean said. You agreed to replace 3. I bought 4. That leaves 1 old roller. Exactly why all 4 need replacing. You planned this. I run a marina. Planning is allowed. They raised the trailer on stands. Sean removed the rusted brackets while Paige fitted new hardware. The job took most of the morning. When they finished, Paige handed him a 1-page access agreement. It described the passenger path along the edge of her marina and stated that fuel operations remained under her control. You wrote this? He asked. I paid someone to make my handwriting sound official. Sean read it. The landing could use the marked path on scheduled service days. The cooperative would not store equipment on marina property. Sean would maintain the fence and keep passengers out of the workyard. Paige could close access temporarily for a fuel emergency. This protects you, he said. That's the idea. It protects me too. That can also be the idea. They signed it on the tailgate of Sean's truck. Paige had not become his helper. She had become a neighboring operator with a clear stake and a clear boundary. That made the relationship stronger than a favor would have. Thomas chose his own role. Maria offered to list him as a paid operations advisor during the reopening. He refused the title. I don't advise committees, he said. What will you do? She asked. I'll show Sean where the boat drifts when the wind comes from the south. I'll help with the first docking. After that, you hire somebody current. Maria agreed to pay him for the training days. Thomas accepted only after she put the amount in writing. Retired doesn't mean free, he told Sean. They spent an afternoon walking the pier. Thomas showed him the safest place to stand while handling a line and where not to place his foot when the boarding plate moved. He made Sean repeat the gate sequence until he could do it without looking down. You taught Paige all this? Sean asked. She learned most of it by watching. I was here too. You came when Paul called. The answer no longer wounded in the same way because Sean had begun changing it. Thomas pointed to the booth. Don't wait for the place to break before you belong to it. That was the only advice he offered. Then he made Sean repeat the gate sequence again. Heather did not visit during those weeks. She sent one message asking whether the reopening date had been set. Sean replied that testing came first. She wrote, understood, and did not ask to be included in the work. 2 days later, a package arrived at the booth. Inside were replacement blades for Paul's old handsaw and a receipt in Heather's name. The handsaw itself had been sold. Sean called her. I don't have the saw, he said. I know. Then why send blades? I found the order in Granddad's desk. He never picked them up. What do you want me to do with them? I don't know. Keep them or don't. It was not an apology. It was the first time Heather had passed along something without deciding how Sean should use it. He placed the blades in the tool cabinet. You can come to the first passenger run, he said. As executor? No. Heather was quiet. As your sister? As my sister. Call before you come. I will. The booth still smelled of cut wood and old river damp. Its repaired door closed squarely, but the upper siding needed paint. The ticket counter shared space with labeled bins for pumps, switches, and small engine parts. Behind it, the 6 $1 bills remained in the drawer beside the old ticket punches. Maria's crew installed the boarding plate on a cold, bright morning. Paige closed the fuel lane for an hour. Thomas watched every bolt. At sunset, the crew moved a cooperative ferry into the approach for the first test docking. Sean stood at the gate with his hand on the new latch, waiting for Thomas to give the signal. Thomas raised one arm. The ferry operator eased the throttle forward. The boat entered the old approach at an angle, corrected near the outer piling, and came alongside without touching the new boarding plate. Too far out, Thomas called. The operator backed away and tried again. This time, The hull settled against the rubber fenders. Sean opened the gate only after Maria nodded. He lowered the boarding plate, but its left edge landed 2 inches higher than the deck. Maria stepped onto it and shifted her weight. "Usable," she said. "Not right." One of the engineers adjusted the shore bracket. The ferry pulled away, circled, and returned. On the third approach, the plate met the deck level. Thomas stepped aboard, turned around, and came back. "That'll do," he said. Sean raised the plate and secured the gate. He had expected the first docking to feel important. Instead, what stayed with him was the repetition. Approach, correction, adjustment, try again. The landing became safe because people were willing to do the ordinary part more than once. The work continued for another 3 weeks. A licensed electrician pulled new cable through Paul's dry conduit. The cooperative equipment received its own panel. Sean wired his repair counter separately and labeled every switch in plain language. Paige helped roll the remaining roof membrane across the booth. Halfway through, the wind lifted one corner and slapped it against Sean's shoulder. "Hold your side," she said. "I was holding my side. You were standing near your side." Thomas watched from below. "You two want advice?" "No," they said together. They finished before rain arrived. Sean sanded the siding in sections between repair jobs. He chose green paint close to the old color. Thomas said it was too bright. Paige said the old color had only looked darker because it was dirty. Heather said nothing because she did not come without calling. The first time she called, she asked whether she could stop by with the final estate tax notice showing the landing had been removed from the estate records. "You can email it," Sean said. "I thought you might want the original." "I do. Come at 4. She arrived at 4, not 3:30, and waited outside the shore gate until he opened it. The notice took less than a minute to hand over. Heather looked at the painted wall and the new service panel. "It looks good," she said. "Still needs trim. I didn't say it was finished." That sounded enough like them to be comfortable, and not enough to pretend everything was repaired. She did not ask to see the letter again. She did not offer advice about the ferry schedule. Before leaving, she placed an envelope on the counter. Inside was a check for half the title examination cost. Sean carried it back to the gate. "I'm not taking this. You paid because I withheld the file. I paid because I needed the answer. You paid more because I withheld it. That part is true. Then take half." He looked at the check. Money could become another way for Heather to decide when a matter was closed. Refusing it could become another way for Sean to keep the injury open. He folded the check once and put it in his pocket. "This doesn't settle everything," he said. "I know. Don't say you helped buy the landing." Heather almost smiled. "I won't." The check covered materials for the booth rail, emergency lights, and a reserve for the next pier inspection. It did not restore the tools she sold. It did show that she was willing to pay part of a cost her decision created. A week later, she called about a window at the family house that no longer stayed open. "Can you look at it?" she asked. "Yes." "Next Thursday." "That long?" "I have ferry work and 2 engines ahead of you." Heather was quiet. "What time Thursday?" she asked. He gave her a time and his normal rate. She accepted both. That repair felt different from every shelf, charger, and loose handle before it. Heather had requested his work. Sean had scheduled it. When he finished, she paid the invoice without calling it a family favor. The first passenger service began on a clear Saturday morning. Maria arrived before sunrise with a clipboard and a box of printed tickets. Sean had already swept the pier, tested the gate, and cleared the repair counter. Pumps, switches, and customer parts sat in labeled cabinets beneath it. Paige marked the edge of the marina path with low rope stands. Thomas inspected them. "People will step over those," he said. "They're guides, not prison walls," Paige replied. "People ignore guides. Then you can glare at them. I can do that." The first passengers came down Ferry Point Road in pairs. Some remembered the old service. Others had heard about the reopened route from the cooperative schedule. They waited beside the booth without entering Paige's workyard. Sean sold the first ticket through the open window. His hand shook slightly when he pulled the old brass punch. The tool cut a clean round hole in the paper. Thomas rang the bell. The ferry entered the approach. Sean waited for Maria's signal, opened the gate, and lowered the boarding plate. Passengers crossed without looking down. That was how he knew the work had succeeded. Safe structures became ordinary beneath people's feet. Heather arrived after the second crossing. She had called from the road and waited until Paige opened the marina gate. She joined the passenger line. When she reached the window, Sean said, You don't have to buy a ticket. I'm taking the ferry. Where? Across and back. He told her the fare. Heather paid it. Sean punched her ticket and handed it through the same window as everyone else's. Neither of them made the moment larger than it was. On her return, she sat on the restored bench until the next group cleared the landing. Then she asked whether he needed help. Carry empty cups to the recycling bin, he said. She did. That did not make her part of the operation. It showed she could enter the place without controlling it. The repair counter opened on weekdays and between scheduled crossings. Paige sent over pumps, battery switches, and small motors that took up too much room in her shed. Sean paid her for parts and used the marina bench only when the written arrangement allowed it. Traffic helped both businesses. Some ferry passengers bought drinks and supplies from Paige. Boat owners began dropping repairs at the ticket window after seeing Sean work. The annual agreement money arrived in monthly portions, just as Maria promised. Sean set aside the pier share first. He paid insurance and operating costs next. What remained covered his work and slowly rebuilt the savings he had spent. The landing did not make him rich. It made the next repair possible before the current one became an emergency. The first conflict under the new schedule came on a Tuesday when a fuel delivery arrived late. Its hose crossed the passenger path 20 minutes before departure. Maria wanted the truck moved. Paige refused. My agreement closes this path during a fuel transfer, she said. We have passengers waiting. I have fuel moving. Maria looked at Sean. The old Sean might have tried to keep both women happy and promised something impossible. The path stays closed, he said. We delay boarding. Maria checked the tide and adjusted the departure by 15 minutes. Nobody enjoyed the delay. Nobody treated Paige's boundary as optional. The ferry left safely, and the marina finished its work. Afterward, Paige handed Sean a cup of coffee. You didn't even argue, she said. It was written down. That has never stopped a man near a boat. Thomas completed his training days and declined further work. On his last scheduled morning, he stood beside Sean while the ferry approached in a southern wind. The operator corrected early, exactly where Thomas had taught him. You see the stern move? Thomas asked. Yes. What do you do? Wait. Let the operator bring it in. Thomas nodded. Sean waited. The ferry settled into position. He lowered the plate without instruction. Thomas removed his old canvas cap and placed it on the counter. You forgot this, Sean said. No, I'm getting a new one. Why? That one smells like your booth. He left it there anyway. By late autumn, the green paint had softened under weather. The ticket window opened without sticking. The booth held a warm service light, a radio, Paul's chipped mug, Thomas's cap, and rows of practical parts. The sliding floor panel remained beneath the bench. Sean kept it clean and waxed. The original packet stayed protected off-site, while certified copies occupied a plain binder in the locked cabinet. Once a month, he opened the panel and checked the cavity for moisture. It stayed dry. Heather visited twice more, both times she called. On the second visit, she brought no papers, no check, and no task for Sean. She sat near the window while he replaced the cord on a customer's battery charger. You still have the one from the house? She asked. It's under the counter. Does it work? It does now. She nodded. Keep it here. That was the full conversation about it. Winter reduced ferry service, but did not stop it. Sean used the quiet days for engine work and pier inspections. Paige kept the marina operating. Maria adjusted the crossing schedule around weather. Thomas came by when he felt like criticizing knots. In spring, the cooperative expanded weekend service. Sean replaced the last damaged trim board and painted it before opening the ticket window. His daughter sent another picture after he showed her the finished booth. This one was a house, a wrench, and a small ferry. Sean understood it immediately. If stories about young people rebuilding a life after family betrayal matter to you, subscribe and return for the next inheritance story. That evening, the final ferry crossed under a pale sky. Paige shut down the fuel pump and waved from the marina office. Thomas's chair was empty, though his cap still rested above the counter. Heather had taken the afternoon crossing and gone home before dark. She had called first. Sean closed the shore gate after the last passengers left. He logged the day's ticket count, placed 2 repaired switches in the pickup bin, and checked the weather notice for morning. The river moved quietly beneath the new braces. He left the bell cord hanging beside the window. The old ticket punches went back into the drawer with the 6 $1 bills. Then he switched off the bright counter lamps and left the smaller amber lamp beside Paul's mug. From the end of Ferry Point Road, the marina had gone dark, but the landing remained awake. The restored booth glowed over the working pier, its ticket window open and Sean's home light burning inside.